first-hand experience of this race and what sort of light or lack of it there is out in the forest there. Perfectly illuminated right now up and down the pit lane because there are floodlights around, and the Grand Prix track's not too bad either, but when you head on to Hatzenbach, you suddenly get the feeling you are all alone, Peter Snowden.
You're absolutely spot on. I think your second point there is a lack of light. That's exactly the point. It's totally different. As you say, it's probably the most frightening racetrack in the world, and then we go and put it in the dark. The only other element they could add is a bit of rain, just to make it a bit more fun.
But it can be a race, I think,
yeah,
this weekend.
I'm sure well, I think it can be, yeah. We'll save that one for later. It's not on our schedule just yet, yes. But the point is, you were saying about Le Mans last weekend, these two races traditionally a week apart. Le Mans, a lot of that circuit's illuminated. Some of it is road, I know it's closed off, but it's fairly well a wide circuit. A lot of it's quite purpose-built. Nürburgring, yes, we have the modern GP circuit. We see them at the start. So yes, that's okay. Then we get on to the infamous Nordschleife. It has a reputation for a reason, because it's dark, it's unlit, and it's narrow. And there is no room for error. And you look at it, some of the shots we've seen, or the people that know it, we know it well enough, there's tiny bits of verges at the side. You just make a mistake just in the dark, a little bit of concentration, lack of the tiredness, or having to dodge a lower class car or something that you didn't quite expect there, those surprises, and there isn't room to go anywhere. That's the problem. You're on the grass, and the next thing you know, there's not much more than the car's width, and it's barriers. And it's barriers and cars don't tend to work very well. The barriers tend to win every time.
Yeah, and you'd be hard pushed to do a track walk around this place, A, because of its length, B, because it's probably in use all the way up to the sessions that are for these cars, for the ring rides, and you can pay your set amount of euro to drive your road car around the Nordschleife minus the Grand Prix track. So actually that ability to find out where you can be slightly offline if you encounter, for instance, two side-by-side BMW 3 Series, which was the case for the 33 Falcon car in the earlier session. How well do you know the circuit? If you've raced here for the last 10 years, then you can draw on all that experience. But if you're brand new, maybe this is only your second year, you're still learning where it's safe to be able to put the car, which is not necessarily the natural racing line.
Well, if I may be permitted, when I did this, and the insight there, when I did this first time I did this race was my first ever 24-hour, 20 years ago. The weekend before, we were at Le Mans, and I asked somebody that I thought might have some knowledge of it, a certain Winston Percy. I said Win Percy. Great name for a racing driver, Win Percy. I was doing this the following weekend. Any advice, any tips? And he just said to me, how good are you at learning circuits? I said, yeah, pretty good. He said, don't do that. He said, just know what's coming up next. And I said, isn't that the same thing? He said, no, don't try and learn it. 5 circuits into one. But he said, just as long as you know, wherever you're on the track, what's coming up next. I said, but there's 170 corners. And he said, you've got a week, my boy.
Yes. One at a time.
Okay.
I mean,
right.
The problem is you get into a little mindset where you're thinking 4, 5, 6 corners ahead, and you forget exactly where you are. Often there's a comparison with this type of motorsport being high-speed chess. Well, I would say chess players are always thinking 8, 9 moves ahead. You cannot afford to do that here. You've got to think about, in the moment, what side of this traffic am I going to go, and where is that going to put me in relation to the next corner? Will I be offline, online, somewhere in the middle?
And I think that's an incredibly valid point there, Johnny, that it's the concentration levels that you just don't get in any other type of racing in this type of circuit. And we've said it before, I don't want to overly labour, but it's not a circuit of 2 halves, it's 2 circuits. You do that bit where you do the modern Grand Prix circuit, and then you do that hairpin back onto the Nordschleife. And all of a sudden, it's a whole different kettle of fish, a different way of thinking. And you said the traffic, the different class of cars, and now it's dark. So we've got an absolute pit lane of cars going out now. It's like being in Dubai, isn't it? Like it's all illuminated at a shopping mall.
Yeah, it's rush hour, certainly, somewhere in the world. It is 8:30 on the nose in the Eifel Mountains, and the cars then already taking to the racetrack. Some will head around the Grand Prix track and straight back into the pit lane to make sure that the checks ahead of the session have been done sufficiently. 1 or 2 brave takers, I'm sure, will take straight to the Hatzenbach, and there's no turning back at that point. There's also the element of, I suppose, that the last bit of the Nordschleife lap, which is like nothing else you encounter, the twisty corners, and then all of a sudden you're onto the Dottinger Höhe, which is dead straight, completely flat, and that enables you maybe to pick up the toe of a rival come race time and pull off a killer move into Tiergarten on the very final lap. We've had plenty of that in the past in the NLS rounds, the shorter 4-hour and 1 time 6-hour race.
I love it, the shorter 4-hour race. A 4-hour race, it's nearly 2 Grand Prix already in one race, a 6-hour race. Call it 3, and we're calling the shorter ones. Something of note there, just that they were just had some footage, Johnny, of the cars going out of the pit lane. We said it was very busy there. Straight away, Team HRT trying to get their Mercedes out. There was such a constant stream of cars going down the pit lane, there literally was no gap, and they edged it forward. And in the end, they backed up, and you could see it. They backed it back onto the pan and said, "You know what? There's so many cars out there." Straight away, thinking. We've got a 3-hour session here. They couldn't get in a gap. Once they're too far down, where's the point in risking it? Do you know what? Sit back straight away, chill out, put it back on the jacks. It's sitting there in the pit lane. It will go out, and they're going to wait now. And I think we're going to see. I think it's a lot of the lower category cars going out. We did say 23 classes. You said?
Yes.
23 classes out here in our nearly. I think it was 93 cars in our first session, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Low numbers for N24 race.
Well,
very low numbers
compared to previous years. Totally right, because this event has, I don't think has ever had fewer than 100 finishers, let alone starters. So and that's partly to do with clearly the coronavirus pandemic right now, and it's very, very difficult for those that live maybe outside of Europe to travel to this event. It's also from a logistical point of view, can you get your team of drivers together? Porsche had expected to be here in high numbers, both on a driver's perspective, but also with their Manthey Porsche. That has had to be struck off the list, and 9 factory Porsche drivers cannot be here after an outbreak of COVID-19, whilst they were all using the same hospitality and the same areas within the garage at Le Mans last weekend. So that's been a very late decision, and it means that people like Kevin Estre, Michael Christensen, Romain Dumas will not be racing here when we fully expected them to be. Dries Vanthoor named against the number 1 car, which is last year's winner, technically speaking. I doubt very much it's the same chassis, but it does carry the number 1 car, because whoever was victorious 12 months, slightly more than that in this situation ago, inherits the number 1 car. And that's exactly as we saw one of the 2 Grello cars last year, rather than being run as 911, that got the number 1 car. And those with long memories will know that it was a Grello car that won on the road last year, but a good week after the result was provisional, some engine irregularities were discovered, and that car was taken entirely out of the result. And the next one in the line, second on the road, was the Audi from Phoenix Racing. So that's the car that is certainly one of the favourites this weekend. No Pierre Caffer in that driver lineup, but Nico Muller comes in to replace. And Nico Muller currently leading a very competitive DTM season this year. The Swiss is a fabulous addition to the 3 guys that are already there: Dries Vanthoor, Frederic Vavish and Frank Stippler. So you can see absolutely nothing later on in the lap. The initial bit of Hatzenbach, actually. Normally, up on driver's right, the high grass banking, it's difficult to pick out a blade of grass there because it is covered with tents and with marquees and hospitality makeshift, kind of bars. They actually build the bars, or have done in the past, out of bits of wood that they bring to the Nürburgring. Sadly, there is none of that this year, and just open landscape, as Klaus Bachler very early on in this session decides to brave it out in the darkness. Thankfully, he's got 2, 3 GT3 cars further up the road, just illuminating the route down to Schwedenkreuz. That is a big help for the Austrian.
And of course, lights these days, so much better in the last 5-10 years than in the past. Some of them are just, sort of like glowworms. And they're incredible now. The lighting systems on cars.
A couple of candles with mirrors behind.
Yeah. It's totally different LED lights now. No one Xenon of 20 years ago. We thought that was a leap forward, but compared to the old, iodine lights. So much better illumination. It does make a huge difference. I would love to see some comparative footage of, say, 30 years ago, which we were saying during the interval, weren't we, for the qualifying sessions, that I'm going to say 30 years ago, and I was going to say some number like 1970 something, but of course we said this. 30 years ago is now 1990. It's actually quite scary to think that.
I know.
It can't be 30 years ago. It's wrong. No, the maths is wrong.
It must be somewhere along the line, because I'm sure the first 10 or so years of my life hasn't then been tripled since 1990. That's bizarre, but it tends to happen that way. The older you get, the more time flies. Klaus Bachler now into the tricky section at Adenauer Forst and on towards Metzgersfeld and Kallenhardt, still pursuing a couple of GT3 cars and not really gaining on them. So this is a good yardstick for the young Austrian, who will be on double duty this weekend in both the 33 and the 44 Falcon Motorsport cars. They run on Falcon tyres, unsurprisingly. Every single car in the entry actually has Falcon branding over their wheel arches, and that's confused me many times in the past, thinking everybody's on Falcon tyres, but that's because they are an event sponsor, and only very few cars run on that particular tyre. We've got Michelin, we've got Goodyear with their Eagle tyre represented on the grid, Toyo, GT, and I'm just scratching the surface really as far as tyre suppliers are concerned. Yokohama will be there too, and I'm yet to find out what Valkenhorst have chosen for their rubber for 2020, but a number of Valkenhorst BMWs that could do well in this event. The 101 driving lineup looks most impressive, with Christian Krognes, David Pittor, Mikkel Jensen, who regularly drives actually with the team, but also is familiar to, I'm sure, ELMS fans with his LMP2 exploits. Was at Le Mans last week with G-Drive Racing and the TDS car. But both Valkenhorst cars have already qualified for top qualifying, which takes place tomorrow night. There are already 13 cars eligible. They have stamped their place for top qualifying 2 tomorrow night, but there is a session prior to that where 18 cars will try and make it as the final 4 to go into top qualifying 2. There are 4 places very late in the day still up for grabs, and it's kind of like a last chance qualifying session for the remaining 18 cars that could sneak in, and that will determine kind of the front 15 rows of the grid for the race that kicks off at 3:30 on Saturday.
Think about what you just said. Determines the first 15 rows of the grid, not places. No, 15 rows of the grid. So first 30 cars. It's madness. Nothing like it used to be though. As pre-COVID, but we are out racing, and I think it was a phrase that Bruce coined quite early on when we got back to NLS1 earlier this year with Full Metal Racing. He covered a lot of the DNLS, the digital version, with John Hindhoff, and they got into that. And he said actually, as a commentator coming back to this, he said he found it really almost not basic, but there were so many camera angles in digital that it was suddenly...
Well, you can sort of put them where you want.
Exactly. You could do that. And he said it was back to Full Metal Racing. But, I mean, VLN that still govern the series for the NLS series and run it all and administrate it. Great effort they went to for that very, very first race back in June to get us out racing again. And really did kind of set a bit of a template for us to go racing. I know there were 1 or 2 other bits around the world had started, but this was the first major sort of series, and they've got on with it and produced it, and it works really, really well. As we said, the shopping mall, which we'll explain more when we see cars going into the pits and explain how that works for you listening, just quite how that works, because it's quite different going into the pit lane, turning right through Garage 1, along the back, go to your crew, unless you're an SB9 category car, come all the way back down again, come in through Garage 2, and rejoin the pits. And it's we saw it last time, Bruce and I, at the NLS 5. John and I, of a couple of cars, the Glickenhaus for one, had got insufficient lock and couldn't turn itself into the pit lane. Now, add in the darkness, and you overshoot that slightly, and all of a sudden, if you've got a car right behind you that has got lock, are you going to gain a place or position in the pit lane by having a car backing up and marshalling it? Am I building it up?
No, you are. and these are the things that people, teams have got to think about. There are various changes from an NLS round as well, so it's getting the mindset of, okay, this is N24 rather than a regular domestic round of NLS. So much debris on the Dottinger. I'm talking about leaves, I'm talking about maybe a little bit of tyre pickup, also the night wildlife, moths and whatnot being caught by the headlights. The other thing that's happening is that Klaus Bachler is reeling in the Porsche that is ahead of it, and he just ran out of real estate. But in the race, probably would have given that even more of a go to draw alongside one of his fellow 911 GT3Rs. And so often cars have arrived into Tiergarten side by side. They really need to sort themselves out, though, as it gets even more twisty and narrow before they then burst their way back onto the Grand Prix track. And you've got the wide expanses of the main start-finish straight. Left to right must be 6 or 7 car lengths, whereas it's more like, sorry, car widths rather, where it's more like 3 car widths as you come off the Nordschleife. So a real bottleneck there that the familiar about this track, those familiar with this circuit, will know all about.
You were saying, Johnny, the Klaus Bachler in the number 33 Falcon Porsche there was actually hunting down a little bit of Porsche honours, and rivalry going on there with the number 18 KCMG. I'm not quite sure who's in that car at the moment. On that at the moment, I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
Well, you're usually right, so I'll just accept that, shall I?
Okay.
There's no probably about it. Remove the word probably. Edit that out, Eve. I didn't say probably. Johnny's always right.
Not so sure. You're building my part here.
But yeah, so it's a little bit of rivalry going on there. Gamesmanship straight away. 2 rival Porsche teams. And as you say, they weren't hanging around. And again, the amount of debris and bits that are flying up. We were just lucky to see a moment ago a little bit of in-car. And the amount of debris and bits coming off at the side of the track, because as you said about John Gore from Aston Martin at Le Mans last weekend, they'd never had to deal with running a race in September since 52 years ago in 1968. But there were leaves. They never had leaves before. There was a problem every pit stop. And you could see it there, even on Dottinger, right up to Tiergarten. Bits of debris, almost like it was driving through summer hayfield. Bits of straw and debris coming up. And it's off-putting to the driver, because you don't want to think about it, but it might be a bit more than a bit of debris. It might be something a bit more important that you possibly need to...
Because you can sort of detune the brain, so I don't need to worry about this, but when you do actually hit something significant, like I don't know, carbon fibre wing off the front of the car in front, then you have to always be alert to
There is never a point on the Nürburgring, on the Nordschleife, where you say, I don't have to worry about that. It is maximum concentration all the time. It may not be always maximum attack, but it's maximum concentration, most certainly.
Right, so if you weren't around, by the way, for our earlier 90-minute session, qualifying 1 took place in the daylight, and Peter and I covered that. So a chance, of course, at the end of this live session to revisit that on the archive if you wish. But the times that were set in qualifying 1 are still present on the screen for qualifying 2. They're all carried over because theoretically you can set your best time in either qualifying 1, 2 or 3. It doesn't really matter, and you can do it with any of your drivers as well. So the time from qualifying 1, the best time, was set by the Conrad Motorsport Lamborghini Huracan. It was a time by Marco Mappelli, and it was an 8:11.428. So that still stands, putting the 21 car fastest, even though the 21 car's done very, very few laps, or in fact,
Johnny,
probably completed the first.
Is that a new time from Di Martino at 8?
No, I think that's the one that stands from earlier on, an 8:11.428. It was, if not very, very close to that. So I can't think that he will have done exactly the same time. And Di Martino out in the session with it in that car. And Di Martino, don't think we got a great deal of him actually in the earlier session. Mappelli certainly, because he set the best time. Axel Jeffries finished the session earlier on and had 1 or 2 squirrely moments on the final lap, and we had a bit of Franck Pereira as well. But both Peter and I were impressed with the pace of that Lamborghini. I think there is a big question mark above it as to whether it's quite got the reliability over 24 hours, and that's purely on previous form. But we certainly hope so, because it'd be great to have another mark with the potential of winning this race after so much German domination as well. Maybe a Raging Bull to look good for this year's race.
What you say, the impressed was certainly the word, because we clocked it, didn't we, quite early on, that they were, Conrad Motorsport were most definitely cycling through all their drivers in that car, which normally means they're not taking it uber seriously, no pun intended, a bit of German thrown in there, but they're not taking it too. So I'm not suggesting it's a taxi either for a minute. It's a heck of a track taxi, of course. But they were most certainly cycling their drivers, getting everybody through in the same conditions. We commented on that. So to go to the top of the standings was quite impressive.
Yeah.
I didn't expect them to do that, to be honest, given what they were doing. I thought they were sort of data collection, getting the drivers settled in. It was the first session. It was, a couple of hours, that's fine, we've got loads to go. But there it is at the top of the standings. The Lamborghini, you say, utterly German dominated, with Audis, Mercedes, Porsches, BMWs up in the top 10, and all of a sudden, ping.
Yeah.
You've got a Raging Bull at the top.
They've got a very Audi-type engine in the middle of that Lamborghini, but it is all Italian around it. And I do know that more recently, Lamborghini able to sort of produce their own version of that engine as well. So it's Audi by design, but has started to be taken in-house, is my understanding. The GT3 Evo of the Italian car. We've got Ferraris in the race as well. No Wochenspiegel Team Monschau Ferraris. You might remember them from the equivalent race last year, the number 11 and the 22. They are not, sadly, in the entry. However, the number 16 car could be one to look out for. That is the older specification of, well, they're both 488s, but the MJ18 indicates that it's the non-Evo version, I think. And then the Octane 126 car, rather, from Switzerland is another one that could be a little bit of a dark prancing horse. We will wait and see. So times carried over, as I say, from qualifying 1 into 2. You are listening to RS1, part of the Radio Show Limited network of channels. Peter Snowden's over there, Johnny Palmer's over here, and I'm delighted to say a man we heard from for a fair few days last weekend during Le Mans is Paul Truswell, live from the Woking Data Centre. And Paul, I know that you've got a special screen exclusively for this session, leaving out qualifying 1, which will be most useful.
You're taking a big risk there, Johnny, saying that you know that I have a special screen. I messaged you before to say that I hope that I will have a special screen.
But the answer is good. Okay, it is a yes. That's good.
So far so good. We're going all right. And it tells us that the fastest in this session so far is one of the 2 KCMG Porsches. You were talking about the KCMG Porsche and questioning who was in it. Well, the 18 car is in the hands of Earl Bamber. He has set a time in this session of 8 minutes 33.110, and the fastest time in this session thus far has been set by the other KCMG Porsche, the number 19 car, which Dennis Olsen is driving. He's done 8 minutes 25.172. Nobody really, and I mean, you kind of hinted at it without saying so explicitly, Johnny, nobody getting close to any of their times that were set in the session this morning. So in terms of the overall qualifying times, no change. And in terms of the overall qualifying times for the top, 31, there's no change anyway, because the top 31 cars will all have their grid position set in the top qualifying sessions, which are early evening tomorrow. But if you're not in that top 31, if you're anywhere further down than 95 or whatever it is in the field, then this is one of the sessions in which you will be setting your grid time. And of course, for the lower classes, that's important as well. So we'll be keeping an eye on people who are improving. Although my impression is, and you may have more pictures at your disposal to confirm this, Johnny and Peter, but my impression is that this is not a session for outright heroics. This is a session for making sure your car is set up and that you can see where you're going through the forests at night. Yeah, it's about focusing the headlights, I think, isn't it? And it's also trying to cycle through all 4, and I think in one case 5 drivers. I need to check a latest version of the entry list, but I did discover in the list that it was issued midweek that one team had gone actually for 5 drivers rather than the standard 4, and 1 or 2 they will actually run the race with 3, or whether there'll be a late driver confirmed. Again, further entry list interrogation required, but there's nothing to say you can't run it with 3 drivers. It's just it becomes more like a kind of Le Mans approach, and more heavy lifting for 3 drivers as opposed to the usual 4. But all the factory teams generally turning out with a quartet. So Di Martino, or at least his car, tops the times, but I think somebody we should definitely be keeping our eyes. Earl Bamber in the number 18 KCA Porsche GT3, and 3/4 of that lineup won't have known they were racing at the Nürburgring a week ago, Peter, because Jörg Bergmeister, Timo Bernhardt, Earl Bamber all getting a very late call from Stuttgart.
But as you say, if you've got to drop drivers, and for the most plausible reasons at the moment, obviously COVID, we can't do anything about that at all. But what names to put in? You'd have thought, you say a week to go. Well, we'll struggle and we'll scrape around and we'll see. I wonder who's available. Oh, Timo Bernhard. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. I'm up for that. I'm up for that. Yeah. Do you know, I was having a weekend off. Yeah. And I'll just go and do the Nürburgring instead. Yeah. They've not exactly filled them with journeymen, have they?
It's not a bad substitutes bench to call on, is it? They were waiting in the wings and raring to go, I'm sure. So the KCMG Porsches, both running on Michelin tyres. Interestingly, you've got that tyre battle, therefore, between, for instance, Klaus Bachler's car on the Falcons and Michelin. You've got at least the car collection number 7 car, which I'm used to being on Dunlop. Dunlop now effectively Goodyear. Different compound, but the parent company becoming the main badge wearer now as far as motorsport is concerned in continental Europe. Antti Burri out in the 830 numbered Hyundai i30, and the Works Hyundai outfit, this arm of it, by the way, based in Germany, but the manufacturer very much South Korean. They have a Veloster and an i30N TCR cars. Numbers 830 is the i30, 831 is the Veloster TCR for Mark Basseng, Moritz Österreich, Peter Terting and Manuel Lauk, who's actually going to be in both of those cars. And we will try and offer you what's going on in the TCR division at various points. There are 4 cars in that, I make it. So the 2 Hyundais, there's a Honda Civic TCR from a team with no name, that's car 170. And the Bonk Motorsport entered Audi RS3 LMS of Herman Bonk, Max Partel, Alex Prinz and Andreas Muntmann in car 171. To the pits goes Phoenix Racing Audi for Jules Gounon. It was Gounon who was put out in that car in the early stages of qualifying 1, I seem to remember. Kim Louis Schramm and Michele Beretta are the silver graded drivers. Not that we concentrate a huge amount on the precious metal system, which is looked after by the FIA, but that does determine whether you're in Pro or Pro-Am. And I have a memory it's by assigning the numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4 to each precious metal and then kind of adding it up and dividing by 4, quite possibly, and you get an average, and then that determines whether you're in Pro, SP9 Pro, or the Pro-Am. No difference at all between the cars. It's all about your driver makeup and therefore which trophy you're going for across the 24 hours. And that means if you do decide to have 1 or 2 lesser experienced and sometimes slower drivers, it doesn't always go that way, but those that perhaps concentrate their day-to-day life on looking after very successful businesses and go racing more so at the weekend rather than being fully employed by a team, they can also race for a trophy at the Nürburgring, and I think that's very, very important to still have that Pro-Am element. It's present at Le Mans, in GTE Am, and still very present at this race too.
What a place to go and do it, though. Go and run, as you said, a successful business during the week, which is, no pun intended, but it's an investment of time and effort and brain power and whatever.
Totally, yeah.
So you're going to have a hobby at the weekend. So you're going to take up car racing, auto racing. So you think it would be, let's go to Mallory Park or Disney. No, let's go and do the Nürburgring 24-hour. Possibly the most daunting circuit in the world, with 100 cars plus taking part of all different categories.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do a silly little 4-hour race. We're going to do a 24-hour race.
Yeah, I know.
It's madness. I was going to say, no pun intended, what drives these people? But then
when you get out there in the darkness, when you have got headlights,
you don't have to sell it to me.
No, I know. I'm talking to the wrong person. But headlights searing into your back bumper. You've got basically what feels like a public road stretching out in front of you, and you've got to try and remember which corners come next and what speed you need to be doing into them. I mean, it is the ultimate challenge, and I'm delighted that X amount of years ago, the sim game Gran Turismo introduced so many people to the Nürburgring that didn't even know it existed, thought it was just dreamt up, I think, by the game's programmers. And then somebody said, no, this place is for real. And they've been racing 24 hours, twice around the clock since 1970. What? I'll have a bit of that, please. But yeah, the gamer generation has really found the Nürburgring for a second time, if you like. Those that were around motorsport in the 70s and the 80s knew all about this little secret gem, but I think it fell off the radar for a period of time. It's definitely back, though, now in kind of modern culture, whether you know a lot about motorsport or not.
was to say, there's a phrase, isn't there? Class never goes out of fashion.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
you know, and that's exactly what this place is. It's a class act. You've got to be a class team to get into this. And it's, you know, we know what it's like to get the ring license and all that. It's not just a question of turn up and enter that race. You can go and do a race at Brands Hatch and other, so Silverstone and other circuits that, you know, famous Grand Prix circuits and stuff, Nürburgring as it was in its day. But you have to go through a process now to make sure you can do it and it's safe and quite right too. And also as a, and from policing that and looking after, you can also have your license removed.
Yes.
For not behaving. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about some of the qualifications of not some of the cars that have gone through automatically. It's not because they finished well in an NLS round this year. It's because of their sector times and pace, which is exactly the point. And it's not so much are they quick, it's are they a danger to themselves or anybody else. And that's the key factor of it.
Yeah.
Are they safe out there on track? Because you've got such a disparity in drivers. And as you said, some of the battles and the champions always come from, you know, GT5 Cup class, there and as ever. And you want that. You want those other cars out there, but there's a huge differential in speed. And some of these boys, it's very easy to go, I'm in an SP9 GT3 car, move over. Well, no, actually, they've got as much right to be there. And it's as you said earlier, Johnny, it's always the job of the faster car to get around the slower car. That's the rule of the racetrack. It's the etiquette, and it's we've seen it happen many a time. We saw some, didn't we, earlier on, of one of the Porsches having to sit behind for a while, and he had to back out of it and just wait. You know, everybody else, because they were in a qualifying session, he wasn't.
Paul Trustwell, some thoughts on where the race is now on the sort of social sphere? I mean, I know I'm talking to the wrong person here because you used to live a stone's throw from the Nürburgring, so it's never been off your radar.
No, I mean, it's you have to be a fairly strong arm to make it a stone's throw. I lived in Cologne, so yeah, certainly relative to the West Midlands, very much closer. So yes, I mean, I've always, and like Peter Snowden, I have been around a few years now, and so do remember
Thanks,
Grand
Paul.
Prix on the Nürburgring. Well, you know these.
I know what you meant. Yes.
Days, exactly. So yes, I mean, I think the point that you were making a few moments ago, Johnny, was that the Nordschleife was kind of the holy grail for the gaming manufacturers. It wasn't really a holy grail for the players, but the manufacturers of these games wanted to be able to provide something which was a bit different. And of course, so they, and the fact that it was 14 miles meant that they had to really stretch their gaming technology to go around it. And then once they made it available and people started playing it, then it, as you said, suddenly for the millennials, the younger generation, suddenly it became, hey, look, there is this racetrack, it does exist. And, you know, you were saying, all of a sudden, the Nürburgring became a circuit of worldwide appeal, not just in Europe. That played into the hands, absolutely, of the Nürburgring 24-hour race. And that's one of the reasons I think we're seeing a smaller entry this year, because, as you were describing, Johnny, the difficulty in getting to the Nürburgring from some of the further flung places. I mean, we know we always have Wayne, what's his surname, comes over from New Zealand.
Yeah.
We have a lot of Americans coming over. We have a lot of Australians coming over. A lot of Japanese come over for the 24 hours. And for the people who come from those further flung parts of the world, travelling isn't going to be easy, as easy this year. So that's why we've got such a relatively small entry, I think. But you know, and then as a result of that great success, we've then had, as Peter Snowden was just describing, the increased emphasis on safety and making sure the drivers are up to it. And also a squeezing of the entry to squeeze out some of the lower classes, because time was when you would have some very standard saloon touring cars out there, not just GT cars. And although we've got still a huge mix, we've got touring car TCRs, but some very these TCRs are proper modified racing cars. There were some very production level cars that came to the Nürburgring in the days when there was over 200 entries. But in more recent years, we've had fewer than that. And I think that's actually a good thing. I don't think we've lost any quality at all by losing quantity in the entry list. And I think this year is another case in point of that. There is no loss at all in the quality of this year's entry, even if it is a little bit lower than we've seen in previous years.
I would totally agree, Paul, and so great to hear your voice again, Paul, and welcome back. Nice to have you on board. I think the point you've just made, that to me, that's absolutely fascinating insight you've just given into the virtual world of this circuit and how it evolved, is I'd never really thought about it there until you've just expressed it. Now you've got my cogs thinking, which is quite a mill. Got them cogs moving. Is never really thought about it of the millennials who've just said of they've used this circuit as a template, the digital, to stretch their abilities and business acumen and get this circuit up and onto a gaming platform. And then the end users get to use it. Then all of a sudden say, by the way, this does actually exist. It's a real circuit, and almost that sort of surprise of what you mean. This place actually exists. It's not just a digital creation.
But I mean, I
never thought of it that way.
The ultimate fashion accessory for a lot of, in inverted commas, boy racers is to have a map of the Nürburgring on the back of their car, and that wasn't always the case. And I bet very few of them have actually been to this event, or maybe to the Nürburgring full stop. But to have that as like a recognition of whether you've experienced it on a sim or just watch the videos on the streaming services of how fast you can go around here. It's become part of racing fans' parlance, and I don't think it was always that case, let's say 20 years ago. And
I think potentially some of the Top Gear stuff and Clarkson and some of
in the transit van, totally
brought it back to Sabine Schmidt, and obviously getting that name out there and bringing it back to this place does exist. It really does exist. It's there. It's been there since 1920.
Something.
I was going to say 23, but that's Spa, isn't it? 27. I was going to say 2027, but you beat me to it. I knew 23 was wrong. That's Spa.
The name you were chasing for, Paul, Wayne Moore, I think. Yeah. Interestingly, on my driver database, he's still down as 40 years old. He's one of those guys who never ages. Because he's a little bit north of 40, I think.
Tiffany Dell's the same. He's got a real age and a racing age.
Yeah, okay.
There's a widening gap every year.
Yeah.
One moves, one doesn't.
I noticed one car that's already moved and in the right direction in this session. The number 2 Mercedes from Team HRT has crept up into the top 6 now, having posted an 8:19.079. So that's not quicker than the 18 car. And Paul mentioned earlier on that Earl Bamber had been, or is, fastest in the session. I don't think that's changed, but Nico Bastian will be pretty close to him with an 8:19.079.
Times in this night session.
So is he fastest then of qualifying 2?
So yes, that is the fastest time from Dominic Bastian. 8 minutes 19.079. Second fastest in this session in the number 4 Mercedes, and that's Manuel Metzger, I believe, at the wheel of it at the moment. He's done 8 minutes 22.339. And then it's the Earl Bamber time, which you were telling us to look out for. It was a quicker time from Earl Bamber in the KCMG Porsche, 8:23.067. Alexander Imperatori has now taken over at the wheel of the number 19 Porsche and has yet to improve on the time that was set earlier on by Dennis Olsen. 8 minutes 25.172, but having gone a little bit quicker than that is the number 29 Audi, the Lant Audi Sport Team Audi. That's on an 8 minutes 23.765 in the hands of Kelvin van der Linde to be 4th fastest in this session. But that's not an improvement on his time or on that car's time from this morning's session.
You mentioned Alexander Imperatori. He's in a strange situation where he thought he would be racing 2 separate cars at KCMG, and that is no longer the case, because what they're doing is putting Dennis Olsen in each. We'll wait to see whether that becomes a reality in the race, because sometimes that's more of an insurance policy rather than an ideal plan. But with the changes in the 18 car, bringing in Earl Bamber, Timo Bernhard and Jörg Bergmeister, as I said, therefore, Dennis Olsen will be sharing the 18 and 19, and it means that Alexander Imperatori will be exclusively racing the 19 car with Italian Edoardo Liberati, young Australian, in fact from Tasmania, Josh Burden, and Norwegian teammate Dennis Olsen, who I've already mentioned. So still the changes. Well, I think they've slowly come to a halt. The musical chairs have stopped at Porsche and other teams too, because the I want to say final entry list was issued earlier on today. There's always the wriggle room
It's
for a
2
few
days
more
before
changes.
the race.
I
Anything
know.
could happen.
Well, that's a very good point. And, are we actually going to be able to start 95 cars or whatever it is? One or two always have issues. The Ford Mustang, we detailed those in the earlier session, the alternatively fueled Ford Mustang, which, well, looked like maybe an engine letting go on the Grand Prix circuit. It spun on its own oil or fluids, and the car was out very quickly indeed. And we wish all those running the Mustang well to try and get that fixed in time. That is the Mustang GT that had Oliver Sprungman at the wheel, number 109 from OVR Racing Cologne. So I don't think that car's going to be taking part in this session, but they have got the rest of the night to get it sorted for tomorrow's qualifying 3, which again, everybody is eligible for. It's just the SP9 cars that sort of don't care about their times from qualifying 1, 2 and 3, because it's all down to what you can do on double lap qualifying. I suppose a single lap qualifying, everybody gets back-to-back 2 laps during top qualifying tomorrow late afternoon, early evening, and that will determine where you will start on the grid on Saturday.
A car that we haven't mentioned much in our earlier sessions, but just worth a note of, we're just seeing it out on circuit at the moment, is the Team Get Speed number 9 AMG of Fabian Schiller starred in that car. Maximilian Gotts in that car at the moment, but Fabian Schiller being an absolute star of some of the NLS rounds earlier this year, which they're not officially a precursor or warm-up or qualifying of anything to do with this race at all. In fact, if you listen to the organisers, they've got absolutely nothing to do with this race, apart from it being on the same circuit and the same people driving the same cars. Apart from that,
yeah,
it's got no connection whatsoever. And the fact that it's also how many times longer. I'm not as quick as Paul Truswell in his brain. Paul's got a pure mathematical brain, and he knows exactly.
It is quite
the last.
Yes.
Last
well,
point.
how much longer is
24 hours and 4
race
hours. I can't
6
think.
hour race?
Yeah, exactly.
A 4-hour race.
Yes.
Well, I'll let the listener work that one out. It's not that long.
You just put me on the spot there. Thank you, Paul.
But I just want to pick up on the number 9 car of which you just spoke, the Maxi Gotts driven Get Speed Mercedes, because by my reckoning that's the fastest car so far in qualifying that isn't in the top 32. I knew I'd say it eventually. The top 31 shootout, top qualifying, give it its proper name. So the top qualifying has defined 31 cars who will occupy the first 31 places on the grid, and in positions which will be determined later on, as Johnny Palmer was just telling us. But the number 9 car isn't amongst that group, but it is the fastest car that isn't amongst that group. So they know they're going to be starting not on those first 15 rows, but what they'll be hoping is that they'll be starting on the 16th row alongside the slowest of the people from the top qualifying session.
Yeah, we'd sort of piece that information together. They are hoping to be ready for tomorrow's qualifying 3, or at the very latest for warm-up on Saturday. That is not a car eligible for top qualifying, so they don't need to worry about tomorrow afternoon/evening, but they dearly like to run in qualifying 3, even though it's an hour long, because when you fitted a brand new engine to a car, you want to at least test that everything's been put in the right place again.
Well, so they're not in the qualifying. What are they worrying about? Having a night off and just doing an engine change routine?
Yeah. I mean, they still want to qualify pretty well. There's only 3 cars in their class, the alternatively fueled division, AT as it's coined, but there were plenty of other cars out there in the race that will offer equal pace as the Mustang does, so they'll find other competitors out there to race all the way through. This just must be slightly worrying. I mean, they'll know how much mileage was on that engine before they got to the Nürburgring, and are they putting a brand new one in, or again one that's been used already? Only they will know. But it will be slightly worrying that the same could happen in the race, especially because it happened so early on in qualifying 1 earlier today.
And do we know between us what the alternative fuel in that Mustang is? Don't tell me it's wine or something. It's
very unlikely to be
Charles's
wine.
Aston. Yeah.
We've had LPG cars in the past, liquid petroleum gas. Paul?
It's a bioethanol in the
Mustang.
the Mustang, and also in the two Porsches as well. They all kind of share an area with the paddock because they share a fuel pump as well, of course, at the entrance to the pit lane. They don't actually get fueled in front of their garage like everybody else does, although quite how that layout is going to work with the alternative layout anyway that they have during the 24 hours. I need to check one of the maps that I've got here.
Yeah.
It's nothing particularly exotic, but it's not regular fuel. It's a bioethanol.
The two Porsches are run out of the 4 Motors Bio Concept car stable. So if you're looking for those on the entry list, it's car 320 and 420. So there's a further evidence of them being biofueled because it's kind of in the team's name. And one's a GT3 Cup Gen 2 car, so 4-litre flat 6. The other being the mid-engine Cayman. They've got a 911 GT3 Cup car and a Cayman GT4 Club Sport, the CS, for 4 Motors Bio Concept car. And haven't caught sight of those machines just yet. I think they're in similar liveries, the sort of royalish blue. Difficult to tell at this time of night, I have to say, so that'll be a job for me to identify them tomorrow when we've got a little bit more ambient light. Hubert Hout now taking charge of the number 2 car, which is fastest in this session. Time set by Nico Bastian. That puts him 7th overall. Now, that was 6th, so somebody else has gone quicker than him. No, beg your pardon, I'm misreading the screen. Still 6th place overall, and therefore I reckon still correct to say it's the fastest in the session. Hubert Hout now taking charge of that car. Dries Van Tor, no Lawrence Van Tor in the entry, but Dries Van Tor's brought the number 1 car in. Christopher Haase in the number 3 car has just taken his car back into the session. And the number 3 is another entry from Audi Sport Team. Chris Haase sharing with Robin Freins, the Dutchman, Italian Mirko Bortolotti, and German driver Markus Winkelhawk. So the area down pit road is still very nicely illuminated. Obviously the team personnel, the engineers, the mechanics, the strategists having to wear face masks if they aren't wearing helmets, but actually a lot of them are. They're wearing almost race-type helmets, so that should provide the necessary protection. And stepping out of one of the Rover Racing BMWs, just trying to identify their driver. It's out of the 98 or the 99. Not sure who that is actually. It might be Lucas Auer. Seeing him from behind, if not Tom Blomqvist from the number 98 car. BMW seem to have done very well as far as bagging spots in qualifying 2 are concerned, because both the Rover Racing entries are already in, 98 and 99. The Valkenhorst Pro-Am entry, number 100, is there, as is the sister All-Pro lineup for Christian Krognes, David Pittor, Nicol Jensen and Jordan Pepper. And the Schnitzer BMW, which had a slight hiccup in qualifying 1 when, as it came out from the pits, all power was lost on the run downhill towards the Dunlop hairpin. Thankfully, it did fire back into life after a quick electronic reset. And the 42 car, again, no stranger to the odd mechanical drama around this place. It did get going again. So that's the BMW for Augusto Farfus. My brain says Augusto back in a BMW. That's much more easy to work out rather than the Brazilian being in an Aston Martin, which did take quite a bit of adjustment for me last weekend when he joined the Aston Martin crew at the AM level. Jens Klingmann in that BMW along with Martin Tomczyk and Sheldon van der Linde.
Little factoid for you. Markus Winkelhawk.
Yes.
Took part in 1 Grand Prix and led it on this circuit. It's the only man to start at the back of a Formula 1 race and get to the lead. How about that?
Yes. I did know that story, but I didn't actually know. I'd forgotten it was here.
Huh?
That would have been
2007
on the Grand Prix
European
circuit,
Prix.
obviously,
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than
Well,
back
yeah,
in the
not the
days when.
Nordschleife, no.
Well, Grand
No.
Prix have run on the Nordschleife, but
yes.
it was well before Marcus's day.
It was well before your time as well.
Yes, I've seen the
Paul,
videos.
don't say a thing. You're still there. Yes. Keep your powder dry.
I've seen the video evidence and
Yes, some of
so
it was
many
in
Formula
colour.
One.
Some of it was in
Yeah,
colour. I know.
but so many Formula One drivers, their quotes are still used now about this place. Jackie Stewart, Sterling Moss, the late great now Sterling Moss, but
Can you remember what Jackie Stewart's quote was? I think it was he that coined the phrase "green hell."
It was.
Yep,
Yeah.
there you go, Paul. And his phrase, I think, was along the lines of, Paul will correct me, I'm not going to cheat and look it up, but something on the lines of, a lap of the Nordschleife in a Grand Prix car, you'll experience more emotions than most people do in a lifetime. That was his way of explaining it. Something along those lines, Paul? I'm sure you know exactly what it was.
Yeah, it was also he who is to blame for the counting of the number of corners. He, Jackie Stewart.
Yep.
Jackie as he was, now Sir Jackie. But he who counted the number of corners and got it to considerably more than anybody else has ever done. And it's one of those things that we've now just have a number of corners. Nobody, and I'm afraid I'm probably one of a handful who has actually got a track map out and said, okay, what can we count as a corner here? And I promise you won't get anywhere near to 167 or whatever it was that Jackie said it was. But if you're really stuck in the middle of the night, you can't sleep, get your track map out and give it a count.
And how many did you make it then, Paul? What's the official Treswell figure then?
No, it's not. There is no official number of corners at the Nürburgring. It's like the magician's circle. You don't reveal it.
I see.
Because it spoils the fun. But as I say, get a track map out and count it, or just say it was 167, which is what Jackie Stewart said.
You know what's really annoying is that I'm now going to do that. You've set it in my mind. That you've basically set me a task there, haven't you? You've set me off. You put the key in the back and set me off. And said, I know Snowden's going to do that at some point at 2 o'clock in the morning when I can't sleep. And I wonder if Treswell's right. I wonder if my number's the same as Paul's number.
There you go. We'll compare notes after.
Indeed.
I wonder whether when drivers are discussing car setup with engineers, whether they say, "Oh, still not quite enough on the rear end through corner 98."
Yeah, through turn 124, I'm getting some understeer.
You know that one, don't you? Because modern F1 drivers refer to turn 1, 2, 3, and 4, which really annoys me. I mean, some circuits actually don't have named corners, so fair enough. But those that do, Silverstone, for example, calling Abbey turn 1 is just sacrilege to me. But around this place, what do you do when you get north of 50 corners?
Well, Abbey goes the wrong way now. It goes right and not left.
You're right.
Completely ruin that corner.
True enough, yeah. But you wouldn't get very far if you did turn left at it these days.
No, you wouldn't. You get into a grandstand. I was actually looking at that only last weekend, being there and thinking, it really is. It's all blocked off and it's just a storage now.
I know.
It's basically storage for the farm.
Yeah, walking over the old bridge corner is horrendous for me as well. And I don't go back anywhere near as far as a number of people listening to this, I'm sure, visiting Silverstone through the years. A bridge didn't always turn right, I'm well aware of that as well. Anyway, we digress massively. Almost an hour done in this 3-hour session. Another 11 minutes and we'll be at 1/3 distance. Augusto Farfus is at the wheel of the Schnitzer BMW. He decided to go one way of an Opel Astra there and had to back well out of it.
He very nearly wasn't at the wheel of it for much longer, was he?
That was a really close call for the Schnitzer BMW right at the end of the lap. And that happened a little while ago, I believe, rather than exactly as I was describing it. But nevertheless, this session, as I said, 50 minutes old. We've already had 1 or 2 close calls, including for Christopher Haase having to thread his way through some slower traffic.
I think Augusto Farfus there would have definitely got some heat into the front discs. Very quickly.
Slamming on the anchors, wasn't he? Yeah. And all he could see was grass and Armco barrier. And this is what I mean about needing to know your surroundings. You have to have that insurance policy if a car you're about to overtake doesn't know you're there.
But that perfectly illustrates what we were saying just at the top of the show, wasn't it, before the qualifying started, that there is no space. And something as simple as that, in not even a second, a nanosecond, split second, it's there. You've got nowhere to go now. In that case, Farfus was able to check it up and pull it back, and it was fine. But it would have got his heart rate going up, I'm sure, and potentially a flat spot on the tyre, which you don't want, etc., etc. It's not so much that. That's time lost is time lost. Now, Paul is the strategist and will know exactly what that means, and it have a huge effect on the race. But at least you're still in the race. if you're off and there's a little bit of grass and suddenly the barrier there, I think there was less than a car width of grass at that point where we saw that, and it was all of a sudden you're by the barrier. I'm not quite sure in the dark exactly where we were. I know
it was late on a lap. It was at Tiergarten.
It was at Tiergarten, was it? Yeah.
And he then wanted to get into the pitch. You can't do that at the moment because the pit lane is coned off, so you've got to do a lap of the Grand Prix circuit before you do come in. But I wondered whether actually he'd intended to do another Nordschleife lap, and she just said, well, on these tyres that are very second-hand now, that's not a good idea, so get the car back to the garage. There's also some strong wind around this weekend. On the forecast, it looks very blustery as well, so every chance of yet more leaves and possibly tree debris, as in branches and larger articles that everyone will have to be wary of. That's also going to potentially bring in new weather systems as well, and there is a fair bit of rain on the forecast. Whether it will actually reach us, I mean, the beauty of this track, in inverted commas, is because it has such a large footprint, you can have a section of it that is affected by rainfall, and then 7/10 of the rest of it completely dry. Just ask Audi about that. 3 years ago, was it, when they came in, decided to fit intermediate tyres, which they realised then was the wrong decision, but actually it turned out to be entirely the right decision, because the section that was wet was not long enough to warrant fully grooved tyres, full wet tyres, and it was a stroke of genius, but entirely by accident, and it meant that the Audis could get ahead of a number of cars on those closing laps. So you've always got to have an eye trained on the radar, but be wary of where the weather's going to hit first on which part of the track. Maximilian Goertz, who ended up in a Armco barrier last year with broken steering, has to negotiate a car stranded right in the middle of the track. That's one of the bio-concept Porsches, I reckon, and couldn't tell at that speed whether it was the 911 GT3 or the GT3 Cup car or the Cayman. So either 320 or 420. It was GT3, so that'll be the 320, I reckon, if I've got the liveries correct for this year, and the four motors bio-concept cars entry. Frank Pereira still displayed as the quickest car out there, but that was a time set in qualifying 1 rather than this session qualifying 2, an 8:11.428. The best time so far, to my mind, Paul, is still the number 2 machine, but actually Mattia Drudi has run that pretty close in the number 29 Lant Audi on the last lap.
Yes, for this session it is still the number 2 car which is the quickest, in the hands of Nico Bastian at 8 minutes 19.079, and just realised what I'm doing wrong here. No, that's right. Second fastest in this session is an 8 minutes 20. So yeah, 8 minutes 19.0 for Nico Bastian. Number 1, Nico Müller, is second fastest, and no, it wasn't a Nico Müller time. It's Nico Müller now at the wheel. It was a Dries van Toren time at the wheel of the number 1 Audi, 8 minutes 20, second fastest in this session. Third fastest in this session, the number 9 Get Speed Mercedes of Maxi Goertz, which we were just talking about, 8 minutes 21.781. Those are the 3 fastest in this session, but even the fastest of them, the number 2 Mercedes, only good enough for 6th place in overall terms. The 5 cars ahead of him all be relying on their times from the session this morning.
I'm thinking Mattia Drudi's time may not have filtered into your data just yet then, because at 8...
Going through that, yes, 8 minutes 19.4
for car 29. So I think that puts Drudy second for this session.
Yes. Yes, it does. You're right. I've got inevitably 2 systems running here.
Yes.
Yes. So one, it appears on the left-hand one, not on the right-hand one. So
okay.
More research required there.
You need to get the 2 talking to one another and in the right programming language as well, which is a trick. But if anyone's capable of doing that, certainly our PT.
Or I know somebody who can.
Okay, that's more important thing. There's a code 60 out on track. Klostertal is the scene, and typically you've got a steady, slowing sections into a 60 km/h speed limit, which includes a 120, so double the speed limit just prior to that, and double wave yellows, single wave yellows prior to that. So it's running the risk of stretching all the way back to Kesselchen, which is normally a really fast part of the circuit. You come out of Bergwerk, and then you let the car do its business all the way up the hill. You can really let the GT3 engine sing as you approach Caracciolo Carousel, but not at the moment because everybody's being delicately waved into a code 60. If we have this scenario in the race, and there is every chance of that, of course, often what might be a 10-second lead for you as a GT3 leader can disappear in no time. If you're catching slower, let's say, TCR traffic, the yellow flags are shown, TCR's doing nothing like the speed of a GT3, and you can't overtake it. There's actually no speed limit in place at that point that you find yourself in. But the most frustrating thing is I can't overtake this TCR car, whereas the guy behind me, 10 seconds further back at the start of the lap, is now all of a sudden on my back bumper. That's the yin and yang, particularly in this race, that we find happens less so at Le Mans into the slow zones there, but is definitely an ever-present at the Nürburgring Nordschleife. Nico Müller, the new driver into the quartet in the #1 car, he didn't taste victory last year with his three teammates, but I'm really excited to see how Nico can get on, the 28-year-old from Thun in Switzerland, joining Dries van Tor, Fred Vervies and Frank Stippler, who do carry the #1 on their car. But there are plenty of other GT3 drivers and teams out there wanting this big trophy. Nico Müller, actually, speaking of him, is now heading into what would normally be a really fast part of the circuit, but is dictated by 60 km/h because of an incident. There's also one a bit further around in the lap as well, on the run from Flansgarten through to Schwabenschwanz. So, frustratingly, but purely from a safety point of view, you have got to tour your way through these sections, and you're closely observed by the officials on scene. And Nico Müller was actually heading through the second of the slow zones on the lap, which was the approach to Schwabenschwanz. He'll now head through the tricky right-hander, which is a double apex right-hander. Got a circuit vehicle right up ahead. In fact, a Porsche being towed, which may well be the blue car.
It's a concept, concept
the concept car.
Bioconcept, sorry, yes, right around. Yes.
That's all right. It's very easy to get those names vaguely in the right combination. Although, was that on the Grand Prix circuit that we saw the car spinning? Anyway, there is a blue Porsche being towed down the Dottinger Höhe now, and Nico Müller needed to be wise to that fact. Thankfully, the amber light bar at the top of the pickup was very visible, even more so at night, I suppose you could say. And he has open road in front of him now, about to head underneath the bridge, which tells you roughly where the left-hand kink is. It's still flat through there, though. And then the very bumpy approach to Tiergarten, this series of left and right bends, but they get ever tighter. There's then a red and white tyre wall that you sort of takes up the whole of your vision there. You can't really easily work out where the track goes next. Eventually, you are fired back out onto the Grand Prix circuit and into that floodlit start-finish straight.
Johnny.
Yes, Paul.
Can I talk about the number 29 car for a moment, because it's confused me a little bit. The Mattia Drudi car, because you were absolutely right. It has been credited with a lap time, I think it's 19.411, which is the second fastest lap in this session. And the reason I didn't tell you about it before is that the car was on an in lap at the time. Now, because of the complicated way in which an in lap happens, as you rightly say, you have to do a whole of the a proper full lap of the circuit, and then you cross the line, but then you come into the pits through the middle lane, as it were, or into the pit lane at the end of the lap. Mattia came in at the end of the lap, and he'd already set his lap time, of course, except it wasn't him. it was Kelvin van der Linde who was at the wheel of the car at the time, the number 29 Audi, which of course is the Lant motorsport car, although the entry list, I'm not quite sure if it says Lant in the entry list officially, but
No.
with the way that Audi customer sport works these days, they're trying to emphasise customer sport, and so I think Lant has been sacrificed for the moment. But that was a car, of course, that made the inspired tyre choice that you were describing 3 or 4 years ago now, Johnny, when there was all manner of weather on the circuit. Nobody quite knew what to put on, but they got it right and won the race. It was it was a Lant car. I think it was number 29 even back then. That's sort of a traditional number for that car.
It is indeed, Paul, and it is actually listed as Audi Sport Team Lant.
Okay.
It's how it is now. That's its correct title.
You're right, Paul. It was 2017 when the 29 car took victory. Kelvin van der Linde was in the lineup that year, along with Marcus Winkelhawk, Christopher Mies, and Connor De Filippi, who is no longer racing with Audi, has moved on to BMW, hasn't he, after that. But then the team, the following year, the equivalent car from Team Lant was then numbered 1, as you always are, for being champion the previous season. And that's the year where we had both the van der Lindes in the number 1 car from Team Lant, Kelvin and Sheldon, along with Chris Mies and a certain René Rast, who is back again with that team this year. Right, so that answers the question regarding 29 and its improved time in this session compared to earlier on. And there was all manners of things going on the track. Was that for Tom Coronel a little while ago?
Well, I was just going to say, I've just spotted that. We just had that, the little bit of footage there of the Pixum Team Adrenaline Motorsport car number 36, and I've got a slightly older entry list, which I'll correct for tomorrow, Johnny, but I hadn't got him down. But Tommy Coronel in that car out there, the Flying Dutchman.
Indeed so. And vastly experienced around this circuit. He regularly competes in the World TCR races as well. I haven't actually checked the entry for the World TCR this weekend, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him also in a TCR car for 3 rounds around the whole of the Nordschleife and the Grand Prix circuit. I reckon he's in car 36, which is from the M2 category, so joining
the Pixum Team Adrenaline Motorsport car.
Christian Gebhardt's in there, Dirk Adorf and Nikolaus Scheller complete the lineup with the Dutchman. Sorry, Paul.
Just to confirm, Tom Coronel is also taking part in the World Touring Car Cup this weekend at the Nürburgring, which, as it has done in previous years, is I was going to say one of the support races, but it's several of the support races, 2, I think, races they get at the Nürburgring this weekend. Tom Coronel qualified 5th immediately before this session started.
There you go. So still plenty of speed offered by the Dutchman.
Well, there's rarely a touring car race on outside of UK that Mr. Coronel isn't involved in one way or the other. So am I right in thinking there, Paul, that he's taking part in 3-4 races this weekend?
Well, the 24.
Well, yes. I don't think he'd be taking part in the Porsche Super Cup, but
no,
pretty much everything else.
Yes. Well, it's not a touring car, is it? So it wouldn't suit him.
That's true.
No, absolutely. And the other thing that's on this weekend is Formula 4, the ADAC Formula 4. Is the other support race. No Porsche Super Cup what I'm talking about. It's the 24H Classic, Formula 4 and World Touring Cars.
Yeah, and you're right, there are only 2 races. We've had traditionally in the last 3 years 3 races I seem to remember, but obviously the season very much condensed now for reasons we know all too well about. There will be 3 ADAC Formula 4 races though, and therefore a very, very tight schedule for the organisers to get through, particularly with these lengthy qualifying sessions. Strictly no free practice, although an argument perhaps to suggest that the earlier qualifying session was treated a little bit like free practice, just in order to shake the cars down and get components ready for the race this weekend. Then again, you could say that a lot of teams aren't necessarily treating this as a full-out qualifying session because of the darkness. So are we going to see the quickest times for some teams actually emerging from qualifying 3 tomorrow? question of wait and see, but it's a relatively short set. I think it's only an hour long, so if you have left your qualifying to the last possible moment, there really isn't much time to lose. Not a worry, though, for the SP9, the GT3 cars, because they will get a chance to compete on the racetrack with theoretically open road in front of them, assuming the intervals work correctly. Still, the gap at the sharp end is between the 21 Lamborghini Huracan and the number 5 Audi, not from time set in this session, but from earlier on in the day. And that gap of 3.9 seconds still separates the Conrad Motorsport Lamborghini from the number 5 Phoenix Racing Audi. And a reminder that the number 1 car is also a Phoenix Racing entry. I was reminded of that by Nico Muller's tweeting of the livery of the car for number 1, because in the corner of one of those shots it actually displayed the Phoenix Racing logo and reminded me that although a lot of these cars are entered as Audi Sports Team, you can kind of put a little dash next to most of them and the individual team names. Christopher Haase stepping out and handing over to one of his teammates. Meanwhile, lots of conversation being had down at Bonk Motorsport for the Audi. That is one of 4 TCR cars in the entry this weekend. Normally, you know, TCR cars are plenty across the order, just like Cup 5. And we're used to seeing into the late teens, maybe early 20s of Cup 5 BMW M240i Racing Cup machines. Sadly, just the 6, I think it is. It was 7 originally on the entry list, and I think we've lost one since then too. So they'll still offer a fabulous race, but it would be great to have 3 times that amount competing on the Nordschleife.
Quality, not quantity, as Mr. Truswell said.
Yeah, and no, there's no doubt about that. There is definitely the strength, if not the depth.
Matteo Drudi back out in the number 29 R8. Battling his way through bits of traffic as we've seen a few times already. That car running in 7th at the moment in terms of overall time. Drudi at the wheel. It's still the Conrad Motorsport car, obviously, at the front of this. We're not really going to see much time changes on this evening.
I think it's probably unlikely, yeah. I'm staring at that.
I thought they'd be a bit closer than this, to be honest. It's just that 811.428 set by Marco Bappelli.
Yes.
Originally, in that Conrad car, still holds at the top of there. Just saw some little bit of pits footage there of Franz Conrad himself, the founder, eponymous founder of that team, and of course a former winner of this race himself back in '93, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah. Although he set the team up in '76, so the team's been around a long time. But
yes.
Mostly famous with Porsches for most of the time. But Germany-based these days. Franz Conrad himself being an Austrian.
Yes. Proud of it. But moved the team to Germany a few years ago now. As I said, great to have a different manufacturer on the grid. They have shown really good speed, not only this year in the NLS, but also last year, the back end of VLN as it was in 2019. But for me, just missing a little bit of reliability, and I hope that can be cured, well, this weekend, ideally. And it'd be fabulous to get a race finish, and I think they could run 1 or 2 teams very close indeed for a podium finish.
And Johnny, we just had a little glimpse of the pits there for a minute and refueling. And the Toyota Super sitting there. It's like it's down at local Sainsbury's or Tesco or Asda, just sitting there waiting to get onto the fuel pumps. And you don't really imagine that, do you? So we're so used to the high-tech, high-speed world of motorsport, where it's come in, refuel, up, out, gone in a matter of seconds, maybe minutes, whatever. He's sitting there happily queuing and waiting. I know it's not imperative that he's back out on the track, but it's just sitting there like you say, down at Asda, waiting to get his fuel.
I know, and the fuel can come out of the nozzles at different speeds. That's one of the reasons why there is a set pit stop time from pit in to pit out that you cannot be quicker than, just so that if your fuel rig happens to be quicker than your next door neighbours, it doesn't actually make any difference and give you an advantage. And we'll be talking about pit stop reference times, because from out of the starting blocks, the majority of the stops you make through the race are dictated by how long your stint has been prior to the stop. But the closer you get to the end of the race, that flips around, and it's all down to how much time there is left on the clock to the checkered flag.
And you can't beat old school sometimes. We've got all this amazing technology and all sorts of things there. And just seeing a little clip there of a car that's left the pit lane. There's obviously some kind of fluid on the pan. So a mechanic's gone out. And what has he done? He's got on his hands and knees, put his nose to the tarmac to sniff it. Is it fuel? Is it oil? Is it water? Is it coolant? You can't beat sometimes with the old school there. That's how it's always worked. It's worked that way for decades and it still works.
There's one member of our team who's not actually part of the broadcast just yet, but will be come the weekend. I think everybody knows who I'm talking about, that is always eager to do that. If not, take a forefinger, dip it in and actually taste whatever that fluid may be on the ground. It's not Paul Trustwell.
No, I think our investigative reporter would definitely have had a finger in the fluid to find out what was going on there. Just going back to your minimum pit times, just because I like them, Johnny.
Yes.
And to plug a website that, or a page rather than a website, but a page that will be of enormous help. 24h-rennen, spelt the German way, RENNEN, .de, 24h-rennen.de /Standzeiten, which is stand, and then Zeiten spelt the German way. So it's pit stop times basically. And if you go there, then it gives you the option of which class you want to choose, and then it gives you the table, and so you can go through and find out your own. Find out yourself what the pit stop times are, and of course they have been changed for this year's race because the layout of the pit lane is different, so the time taken in the pits includes the time taken to drive down the pit lane or round the pit lane, so that's all included there. So you'll see the time spent in the pits depends upon the number of laps you've done in the previous stint, and then it gives you the appropriate number of seconds that your pit stop has to be. So it's a very useful little website, which I suspect will be open on my screen for most of the race. 24h-rennen.de /Standzeiten.
And remind me, Paul, how far out from the checkered flag does that measurement change, i.e. you start focusing on how much time is left?
70 minutes.
I had a feeling it was that.
Minutes.
Right, so up until 70 minutes to go, you'll focus entirely on how long you've just done in your stint, and that dictates how long you're in the pits for. 70 minutes from the checkered flag, it flips around, and it's all down to the minutes that literally trickle away, and it is done on a minute-by-minute basis as well. So yes, important charts for the strategic engineer, for the chief engineers. And
it's also different for the first stint as well. Sorry, I should just add.
Okay, right.
Because the first stint includes the formation lap.
And I think I'm right in saying that none of the GT3 cars are allowed to pit until you've done 5 laps.
That's right.
So
and that's, or at least not to refuel.
Right.
If you do come in the first 5 laps, then you don't have to. There's no constraint on pit time.
Yeah.
So you can change a wheel or.
So if there's a puncture early on, emergency services are all fine, but you can't put any fuel in it. That's worth knowing too, because in the first 5 laps we may spot somebody thinking they could get away with it, pumping a bit of fuel in early doors. They will be pinged for that. Still code 60's out on track. Klostertal is the scene, and that's getting progressively longer, that section now, that is dictated by a 60 km/h speed limit. So again, no chance of going faster than an 811 because of that rolling roadblock, if you like.
Just thinking, Johnny, you were just saying about that, you can't come with those first 5 laps, as Paul said, you can't refuel in those first 5 laps. And it's easy to think, oh, 5 laps, not too bad, because it's 5 laps on the Nordschleife.
Yeah,
so
totally.
We're talking 40, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Can be, and he's like, whoa, hang on a minute, that's a long time to be out there with the problem, as Paul said, they can't refuel. But it's so easy to forget that it's this circuit, it's so different to anywhere else. 5 laps, yeah, okay, so what's that? 20 minutes, then 15, 20 minutes? No, it's not. Yep. It's considerably longer.
It's about 80 miles, actually.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's a long way to go. Robin Frimes at the wheel of the number 3 Audi, and that's interesting because one screen in front of me says it is the Dutchman, the other says it's Marcus Winkelhawk, so there's some confusion there. The 33 car definitely being driven by Sven Muller. But I wonder whether one or two niggles with driver IDs are still being ironed out. You don't have to go back too far in the Nürburgring 24 hours when we didn't have any driver ID at all. I remember in my early days at Nordschleife, I spent my off-shift time up and down the pit lane trying to ask the teams in very pidgin German, who's at the wheel of your car right now? And sometimes it's very obvious from the lap times because it was the real gun driver in, but when you've got 4 platinums in there and they're all within that sort of top 1% of performance, it's so tricky. But it's a real godsend now to have this driver ID system whereby the driver gets in the car, switches to the correct 1, 2, 3 or 4, and that tells us, the fans, who's driving at any one particular moment.
I think the intel's amazing. I'm still just struggling and processing with the idea of somebody looking so refreshingly baby-facing in my early days. It's
well,
like, really?
Yeah.
What, 5 years ago?
Yeah, probably 5, 6 years ago. Yeah.
Just when you left school and came straight into this job.
I wonder what all these teams wondered. What, you know, this young whippersnapper coming up going, "Tell me who's in your car." No, we don't have to tell you anything.
Yes. Shouldn't you be in bed?
Yeah.
Does your mum know you're out in the pit lane?
Yeah, I got all those. Yeah. So I came back to the booth with my tail between my legs. Now, one or two did actually tell me the top secrets, and it was fascinating to know, particularly in the evening when night had fallen, who was in for that transition stint from daylight into nighttime. And we're going to have a significant chunk of night time, i.e. in darkness, similar to Le Mans last week, i.e. 12 hours, I would think.
Probably half the race, roughly.
Yeah, whereas when it's held in May or June, Paul, it's not that bad. I mean, it's not as good as Le Mans would be around the longest day, but I think these drivers who regularly race at this event might be used to 8 or 9 hours of darkness.
Yeah, I mean, obviously last year, the Nürburgring 24-hour date does vary quite a lot from one season to the next, depending which holiday they choose to go near to it. And it's now next year, 2021, isn't it, that they're actually there's a potential that the two races might clash, Nürburgring and Le Mans might clash. But traditionally, Le Mans is held on a weekend that is very close to the longest day. This year, it was held the weekend before the equinox, and this weekend is the weekend after the equinox. So,
there we go.
Peter said a moment ago, 12 hours and 12 hours. It's pretty much on the nose of daytime and nighttime running. And of course that is going to present its own issues, and I think the thing which is going to present a bigger issue is just, to be frank, there's going to be so much less traffic about, and let's keep our fingers crossed. We have, as you were saying, Johnny, had a fairly long code 60 period which has spoiled faster lap times, but during the race I think we could get some long green periods where we'll be able to have some proper flat out running. Who's to say we might even get a distance record?
Well, the fact that we've got fewer cars will only help that, you would think. Less incidents, clearer roads, and yes, the potential to go further than we ever have in this event. Sven Muller having to stay in the queue, which includes a number of GT3 cars. I think just ahead of him may well have been the number 3 Audi of, I'm going to say Markus Winkelhawk, purely because he's on the timing screen, rather than being detailed from the onboard as being at the wheel. As I say, there was a little bit of confusion as to whether it was Marcus or Robin Freins. Driver change at Fricadelli. They have a Pro-Am and a Pro car entered this weekend. Now, interestingly, I think I've got this the right way around. The 30 car is into top qualifying already, but the fully Pro car is not. So they're going to have to use top qualifying wisely and hope that they can be in the top 4 to then progress into qualifying too. But Mathieu Jaminet, Lars Kern, who interestingly on the latest entry list is down as Michael Kern. I wasn't aware that he had a different name, but whether that's a typo, I'm not sure. Maxim, what? Yes, a moment.
No, you're right.
Light bulb moment.
Yeah, that was a little light bulb moment. Yes,
I was just going to say the light bulb got on the Truswell household there, hasn't there?
So yes, because I looked at that and I thought, because I got to know Lars quite well last year, and he disappointed that he has never won a big 24-hour race.
Yes.
And when I saw Michael Kern, I thought, is that the same one? But thank you for clearing that.
It is totally. There isn't a Michael Kern, as far as I can gather, who's ever raced at the Nürburgring before, so it has to be Lars. And Lars, I thought, was his Christian name, so I'm not sure whether confusion has crept in there. Maxime Martin, who was a Le Mans winner last weekend, switching from Aston Martin to a Fricadelli Racing Team Porsche, and he'll take to that like a duck to water, I'm sure. Although a lot of his experience has been in front-engine GT cars. I remember back to the Mark VDS days when he was in BMW Z4s, a real stalwart in early 2010 GT3 racing, but I'm sure he'll get to grips with that Porsche very quickly indeed. And Lance David Arnold is the 4th driver in car 31. As I say, that car not yet in to top qualifying 2, which is the all-important session tomorrow. Meanwhile, and breathe, yes, there are a number of stories, as you can probably tell, bouncing around in my head that have been gradually progressing through the week. I didn't expect so many Porsche drivers, sadly, to have to be out of the race, but adjustment has had to be done. And I'm really impressed, actually, with the majority of the teams being able to bounce back, get quickly on the phone, and call up their B team. When do you think it's Timo Bernhardt, Neil Bamber, and Jörg Bergmeister for KCMG.
Really was a B team, wasn't it?
Not at all.
Quite literally.
Not at all. Le Mans winners there. And Bergmeister with all his experience in prototypes in the US and all his Porsche victories as well. You just think, what was keeping them out of the car?
Timo Bernhard hasn't done much, has he? Let's face it. Come on, he's on the B team. I think we can say that safely because they've all got a name starting with B, so we can call them the B team safely and not be offensive about it, not being derogatory. So they are the
Bamber,
B team.
Bernhardt, Bergmeister, the B team, called in by Porsche. You can't nick that headline. Anybody writing this weekend? That's
copyright.
Firmly
RSL.
Snowden Palmer copyright. RTM. Anyway, out of the Yokohama S at the start of the Grand Prix lap goes a line of at least 2 GT3 cars, might be 3 now, latching together. No, I think it's still the Audi and the Porsche virtually glued to one another. It is the 3 car ahead of the 33. So Markus Winkelhawk cannot shake the company of 33, one of the 2 Falcon Motorsport Porsches, which is still trying to get a good time under its belt. Sven Muller, when you combine both sessions, down in 23rd position, and its best time an 8:28.4. The 44 sister car, no longer a BMW, remember, they're both Porsches at Team Falcon these days. Peter Dumbreck doing the driving there, and he's currently 13th. But for those that haven't already made a place for top qualifying 2, this is looking good for the top 4, because 21 Lamborghini, 5 Audi, 4 Mercedes and the 18 Porsche have not yet secured their place, and they're obviously showing good speed around the Nürburgring Nordschleife, which promises much for top qualifying 1. I wonder whether we're looking at the top 4 that will sneak into Q2 already, but there are a number of cars that will still have a say-so about that. Paul Trussell, on the subject of top qualifying, those that will have to do their time initially in qualifying 1 and hope to get into qualifying 2, you cannot switch drivers between the 2 sessions. And I'm looking at the lineup at Mercedes number 4, the Team HRT crew, and I mean, that's tricky. I'm going to guess they'd go with Mauro Engel, but of late, Adam Christodoulou is able to certainly punch at a similar level to Mauro Engel. And Manuel Metzger, I know a few years ago, really surprised you as someone you didn't know a great deal about, and he arrived on the radar after a superb performance.
Yes, that's right. I can't tell you everything I know, I'm afraid.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, you probably know more than you can say.
Take it as read that Mauro Engel will be the qualifier. Peter Snowden's at an unfair advantage here as well, because he was present commentating on the VLN race. It wasn't the 6-hour race, it was the one before the 6-hour race, where HRT appeared with all 4 drivers for a 4-hour race. And I raised an eyebrow at that and thought, why on earth would you need 4 drivers for a 4-hour race? And it didn't take a lot of speculation to suggest that it was because they were practicing for the 24 hours. And so anything that you saw in that 4-hour race happen at HRT will probably happen during the 24 hours.
Yes. Of course, it officially didn't happen, did it, Paul?
Oh, of course it did. I mean, it was a 4-hour race, though,
Yes.
and as I say, I think Adam ended up only getting about 5 or 6 laps or something at the end of the race. Anyway, so I mean, a lot of the teams, even though there wasn't a qualifying race, a formal N24 qualifying race this year, they did have the opportunity to kind of have a practice for the 24 hours using one of the NLS races. Sorry, I should call them not VLM. The NLS races, as they've been called, for the whole of this year.
A chance to get their eye in.
Yes,
Well, yeah.
exactly.
And thank goodness there has been the opportunity to do that in NLS this year. As Paul makes a point, no official qualifying race, which is run on the same track traditionally as in previous years. You use the Yokohama S, you run all the way down the hill to the Dunlop hairpin, unlike the NLS rounds, but there just hasn't been the room in the calendar to fit that one in. And that, I wonder, is why we've got this different format for top qualifying rather than the usual shootout for 30 cars in one session. It is very much a two-part affair this year.
But what I think is absolutely brilliant, and hats off to everyone involved in making this happen, and I don't just mean organising sides, the clubs, VLN, teams, drivers, mechanics, logistics, everything that goes with it. We have had 5 rounds of NLS.
Yeah.
We've had a 6-hour race. We've had Le Mans 24-hour. We've got the Nürburgring 24-hour coming up. Not quite as we know it, no, but nothing in the world is really quite as we know it at the moment.
That's
what
true.
is important is that it's out there, it's happening, it's only temporary, it's getting better, and it's changing all the time. We've got spectators now on the grandstand there. No, we've got no campfires, bonfires, and all that around the Nordschleife. I get that. It is slightly strange to see, but we have still got racing, and we've still got motorsport out there, and it's an industry, it's a business, it's giving people jobs. And it's great, and not of all us talking about it.
Well,
just 2 of us, 3 of us sitting here now with Paul talking about it. But it's everybody that's involved in this. So long may it continue, and long may it just evolve and just keep coming back bit by bit, chipping away. But I think huge credit to all involved that have got this out there. And it might not have the grandstands full of people at the moment, but we've got motor racing out there. To coin the phrase from our dear friend Bruce, full metal racing. We're out there, and it's happening, and it's only going to get better. And long may it continue.
And I think the longer it can run under these COVID-19 restrictions, the more we're promised to get, because it is motorsport working their way around the restrictions. And the toe in the water will have probably been a Portimao event held by the Creventic organisation from the Netherlands, getting together for a 24-hour race, and that was a heavily restricted weekend that we covered here on the Radio Show Limited network. And then gradually, you know, other championships have slowly woken up. So the European Le Mans Series, then Le Mans, which was postponed, and finally did happen, sadly, behind closed doors. But, you know, the more the medics learn about how this virus behaves, that gives you the opportunity to then continue to keep motorsport going. And I'm pleased that, you know, various organisations are happy to run much later on into the year. We're going to have races in well into November, it seems, just so that we can cram it all in.
And sorry, Paul, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, I was just going to make the point about needing to get spectators in, though. It's a desperately difficult situation, and I'm certainly not wanting to raise and suggest that anybody is making the wrong decisions in these times, unprecedented as they are. But to me, motor racing has to be observed face to face. It has to be watching it on a TV screen, watching it on monitors isn't the same as being there, and it's a spectator sport, and to me you need to have a crowd watching, and for the drivers to fully appreciate the appreciation that they are getting from the crowd. You know, that's all part of it. To stand in front of an empty grandstand and wave your trophy is a very hollow victory somehow.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. Well said. But we're getting there slowly. If ever there was an industry that can adapt, we've seen that with rule changes and whatever. And it is what it is. It's a global situation, and the industry has adapted and extraordinarily well. And I think hats off and commendation to everybody involved for doing it. And we're out there getting it done. And I can't agree more, Paul. That just that final sort of link in the chain, if you like, is just to have, you know, the ambience, the feel, the people out there, which is, they're the ones that are paying the tickets. They're coming to see it. They're the ones that are listening to us, watching it on the television, the screens, or on radio, whatever it may be, or just even live at the circuit. And we do need that back again. It is that final piece in the jigsaw. But we're heading in the right direction week by week, and it's not even changing by the month. It's changing by the week, isn't it? Very daily at the moment. So long may it continue. And I'm just so pleased it's happening and we're getting there.
And also really cool that there can be some semblance of a crowd permitted onto site. Yes, not onto the Nordschleife, but Grand Prix grandstand tickets became available very late on. You had to be quick to get them because they are heavily restricted. But I have seen at least some people in the grandstand at the Mercedes Arena, and earlier on in the lap as well on the main start-finish straight. And there are one or two other grandstands much further down, lots of gradients on the Grand Prix circuit, and surrounding the Dunlop hairpin, one or two spectators remaining sensibly socially distanced. I just want to run through the winners of the NLS races for those with terrible memories like myself. And although I've tried to go back and revisit one or two, there was 4, 8.
That's what the internet's for.
Lots of hours of racing that we've had already. So the season started well for the BMW of David Pittor and Mikkel Jensen. They took victory in their M6 GT3 for the first round. Next up, that was when the 4 guys turned out for HRT. So Maro Engel, Manuel Metzger, Adam Christodoulou and Lucas Stoltz. And as Paul said, Adam just put into that car really for the last 5 or 6 laps, but they did take victory.
But don't forget they took victory on the first round as well, only on track.
And then had it taken from them.
Correct. Yeah. So it was a way to start. That was NLS1. That was quite a season opener.
Yes.
So we then had the NLS2 that you're talking about,
which was the following LS2. Yes, on the 11th of July. The following day was NLS3. So that was the double header over the 11th and 12th of July, which was again a win for the same quartet: Engel, Metzger, Christodoulou and Stoltz. Nicky Katzberg and Steph Dusseldorf in the number 99 BMW took the victory in the 4th and final 4-hour race that we've had so far, because we were then into the longer distance 6-hour race, and it was a win for the Lant Audi R8 LMS, the only win so far for the 4 rings of Audi, with Mattia Drudi, who we were talking about earlier on, Chris Mees and Kelvin van der Linde. Porsche, I've noticed, are absent from the 4 big German manufacturers. So 2 wins for Mercedes, 2 for BMW, 1 for Audi, but nothing so far for Porsche.
And don't forget a Ferrari win in there as well on paper, but then disqualified an hour later.
Right. Okay.
Just to add it in, the Swiss Run Octane car.
Yes. So yeah, that's a classic example of results not telling the whole story, but they are the ones that will be etched into the archives for future years. David Pittor, a guy who kind of continues to go from strength to strength. It's his car, you can hear it in the background, just negotiating the Kleiner Carousel now for Valkenhorst Motorsport Car 101. Paul?
Point picking up on really for tomorrow's top qualifying sessions, Q1, Q2. That wasn't put into the timetable as a last minute thing. It was always planned that this year's N24, originally scheduled for May, would have Q1 and Q2 structured as it is. So this idea of having to progress into the last bit, yes, you'd have to get into the first bit first based on previous results, but then this 2-stage process, that was in the original plan.
Right.
So I thought you may have suggested, Johnny, that it wasn't going to be that way, but no. So we're doing what we intended to do this year, and presumably, if it works, then there's no reason not to do it again next year if we have a more normal race.
That's interesting, and a lot will depend on actually how it happens in reality, because I suppose you can simulate this new format of top qualifying, but until it actually happens for real, tricky to tell how it actually will pan out. But I think that could provide definitely a completely different element to the fact that we've only got 13 cars decided so far for the all-important qualifying to determine the front 10 rows, 5 rows rather, and a bit more. But yes, I hadn't realised. I was posing the question as to whether maybe it had been rearranged because of our current predicament, but it was always the plan from the outset. So thank you for clearing that up, Paul. 21 Lamborghini Huracan still quickest when you combine qualifying 1 with 2. That's the Lamborghini Huracan of Conrad Motorsport. Frank Pereira, the last to drive it, but Marco Mappelli's time from much earlier on in the day still stands, an 8:11.4. Kim Louis Schramm has taken charge of the number 5 Audi, with Lucas Stoltz last in the number 4 Mercedes, but that car's now in the pits. Timo Bernhardt getting some all-important track time behind the wheel of the 18 KCMG Porsche. And the number 1 car has been, until very recently, been driven by Nico Müller, but he's just brought that car into the pits as well after 9 laps completed across the day. And we've just ticked over half distance, I notice, of this 3-hour session. There was an 8:30 start local time, Central European Summer Time, and scheduled to continue until, well, just after 11:30, the way things things like this work, because you always have to bolt on 7 or 8 extra minutes to the end of the scheduled time with cars completing their laps. I wonder who may be next to go quickest. Peering down the timing screen to have a look at some improvements. The 35 car is an interesting one to look at, because that was entered as an SP Pro car. It's a Black Falcon Team Identica Porsche. This is a brand new car, as far as I know, for 2020, and it's Porsche trying to bridge the gap between a cup car that you might see in the Carrera Cup GB or Carrera Cup Deutschland and a GT3 car. It sits somewhere in the middle. Same engine, same drivetrain, but a little bit more aero on that car. And Marek Bockman, Tobias Müller, Carlos Rivas and Mike Rosenberg are actually eligible to take part in qualifying 1. So I'm going to be interested to see how the SP Pro car stands up against the more familiar 911 GT3Rs.
Yeah, I think it won't be as quick.
It shouldn't. It shouldn't be, certainly.
Where it will have an advantage will be, I suggest, in the race itself. It'll be able to go a little bit further on tank full of fuel. So I'm not suggesting that at the end of the first hour it will be in the lead, but it will certainly be able to go further on its first tank full of fuel, and therefore, if it can be reliable and all those other ifs and things, it may be dabbling in the top 10 for certainly a good part of the first part of the race, I would say.
Yeah. Well, Rivas has just set the best time of the day in that car with an 8:46.281. I can tell you it puts it 31st when you combine both sessions, and Paul may be able to answer further where that puts it in this session exclusively. But yeah, I mean, sadly, gone are the days now where you get the odd SP7 Porsche into top qualifying. We have had them in the past. Certainly remember 1 and possibly 2 snaking in there from the standard qualifying sessions. We're not going to get that, though, in 2020. And therefore, the 35 car is the next nearest thing, this halfway house between a Porsche Cup car and a GT3.
Yes, the other kind of cars that are knocking on the edge, the SP7s, as you say, the class designed for proper GT Porsche Cup cars. But look out for the 2 GT4 cars not running as proper GT4 cars, but as SP8Ts, 2 Valkenhorst Motorsport BMWs, GT4s, M4s, I should say, not to be confused with the M6 GT3 Pucker car, but the M4, which runs as a GT4 car. And number 73 is the faster of the 2 Valkenhorst BMWs at the moment. And the other possible one is, because never ignore anything from Black Falcon, the GT4 Mercedes running as an SP8T class car as well, with the turbocharger, number 38.
Yes, the BMW M4s are interesting because when I enter the entry into my, I was going to say little spreadsheet, it's getting rather large these days, but I always try and include whether a car is turbocharged and then further whether it's single turbo or twin turbo. And the BMW M4s you talk about, it's a sort of cross between the two because it's got a single turbo unit, but with what's called a twin scroll inside, a twin scroll turbo. So there are two sort of jets of turbo going into a single unit. So I've had to create a completely different column. This 3-litre engine is also, by the way, a BMW engine used in the Toyota Supra, which is brand new for 2020. That's a new homologated GT4 car. There's one in British GT this season as well. But the Toyota GR Supra GT4, if you didn't know, is powered by a BMW engine, exactly the same unit that is found in the M4s, the straight six.
I'm intrigued that you're saying that your little spreadsheet. I know
I corrected that.
Well, you kind of caught yourself there a bit, didn't you?
Well, do you know about twin scroll turbo?
And BMW engines and twin power turbo and all that? Yes.
Right. Okay.
My BMW training days. So, yes.
Good.
No, not a Goodwood, no. But that is this spreadsheet of yours.
Yeah, it's a work of art, isn't it, Peter? That's what you want to say.
It's not just a work of art. It's the amount of space it takes up on your screen. It's just I've never seen anything like it.
It's the full laptop screen of, I don't know what that is.
Big.
Yes. Yeah. However many inches. Yeah, but I need it because there's so many cars and so many drivers in this race, and it's pretty important to know who is where.
I bet it's copyrighted though. I bet you don't share that with anybody, do you?
No, not on your life.
No. So when you stepped out earlier, when I put a USB stick in, I jest.
Well,
I tried, but it was password protected.
Good luck in deciphering it. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I did. Yes.
Yeah, you might have to take it to Bletchley.
What is that? No, I just asked Paul. Trussers will know. Trussers is
maybe
way above Bletchley level. He can sort things like that
That's
out
a good point.
in an instant and just look at his head, look at me, shake his head, and go, well, "Don't you understand it, Snowy?" But no, Paul, I'm not on your level.
The beauty of it is that I mean. You and I have worked together before, Peter, but Johnny and I have been working together for quite a few years now, and we learn each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I like to think, Johnny, that we kind of fit quite nicely within one another, if you see what I mean. And the way that you approach things is very different to the way that I approach things, and so that between us we have the answer to most things. And as I say, we kind of learn, oh yeah, that's something that I can look up, and then I'll suddenly look at Johnny and say, yeah, your spreadsheet will tell us this, won't it, Johnny? And I know that your system has certain bits of data in it that mine certainly won't be able to tell you, and different types of twin turbos is one of them. I don't no clue. I'm not that mechanically minded.
Well,
nor am I, to be honest, but I'm always keen to learn.
We'll sort that one out for you then.
I'll ask Joe Bradley what he knows about twin scroll turbos in a single unit.
It's only a 24-hour race. We haven't got time.
I would extend that point though that you've made, Paul. In that I think the majority of the team within the Radio Show Limited network all has their areas of specialism, and I think we complement each other very, very nicely. But that is me possibly self-indulging. But
never stop learning. Never stop learning.
No, that's the key to it, definitely. And by the way, these are not the only voices you will hear across our weekend of coverage of the 48th edition of the Nürburgring 24 Hours, because Joe Bradley and Nick Damon are on board for the race, and a certain Alex Brundle, who was a class winner in this event last year. He, for a time, led last weekend's 24 Hours of Le Mans in his LMP2 of United Autosports. He's an ELMS race winner, of course, this season, and the former LMP3 champion in the ELMS. So great to have Alex on board to make it actually 6 different voices you will hear through the course of this weekend and our coverage.
There's just been I'm watching on a live stream, which is it's all publicly available. It's nothing secret. It's taking TV pictures, and we've got I think it's Hans-Peter Neundorf team who's just been giving, I don't know if you've been watching it, Johnny, a splendid presentation of what all his screens do. They've moved on now to looking at telemetry screens, but the one before is a strategy screen that you might recognise from when we've been working alongside one another.
Yes. Okay. But does it include the little blocks that are slowly building through the race?
Yes, except you don't need to do that if it's not a race situation. But,
that's true. But,
you've got all of that.
Just to make sure we're on the same sheet.
You've got a track map and various other things as to help you plan what you're going to do. And it's a funny thing, the Nürburgring race, because in some ways it's much simpler because it's a shorter, or it's a longer lap, I should say. Obviously it's a longer lap, but it means that there are a fewer number of laps to complete. So you have quite a long time to make your decisions. You know, if you don't come in this time, you've generally got about 8 minutes to change your mind and come in the next time. But it does mean that the decisions that you make are that much more critical. You have to deal with 9 sectors on the Nürburgring full circuit now. So you have to deal with all of those types of things. But as I say, the problem is that your scope for strategic master strokes is actually quite limited, because you can only come in at the end of a lap. And as I say, if you don't come in now, you're going to have to wait nearly 10 minutes before you get another chance to do so.
Yeah, and that uses a significant chunk of your fuel tank as well, and is that necessarily going to give you track position too? Is something that you need to bear in mind, although you're never really going to get track position around this place. Looking for some clear air, which is sort of non-existent beyond lap 3. Indication that a car has been off the track, and clattered the barrier a number of times, because it's almost like a debris stream, and it results in a car facing the wrong way.
It's not the Supra, was it, by any chance? It's that Shadow. It was a very quick glance as went by. It's
or if not a Cayman.
Yeah.
But that was difficult to tell. It was heading into Adenauer Forst, and Markus Winkelhawk was blinded by the light of that car facing the wrong way. I reckon it could actually be 2 cars. No, 243 is moving on the tracker, so car 44 appears to be the car in question, and that is not moving currently on the tracker. That's the Falcon Motorsport Porsche, isn't it? Well, I wonder whether it was Cayman shaped. I didn't realise it was 911 GT3R shaped, but one of the Falcon cars definitely not on the move currently, and this is at Adenauer Forst, so it's exactly the right place, and there are code 60s galore out to make sure that everybody is slowed sufficiently in time for that. So one, Paul, for you to keep your eye on the sector times. If 44 has got as far as Adenauer Forst and then isn't triggering any more sectors, I think we've got the car in question, and it looked to have rattled the barrier both on the right and the left before coming to rest. And there is definitely concern down at Falcon Motorsport regarding their missing Porsche. They've got 2 in the entry, but the 44 has not come round yet, Paul.
Peter Dumbrek at the wheel of that.
Peter Dumbrek, we think, Paul.
Yeah, exactly. And you are right, he is stuck in Sector 5 at the moment, which is a long, old sector which takes them all the way down through Wersheifen, over the bridge at Breitscheid, and then, as you say, up the hill after that, going up to towards Adenauer Forst.
Well, it's facing the wrong way on the left-hand side of the track, and as you said, blinding. So you don't really want to come around that corner and find headlights. You don't really want cars facing the opposite way on the racetrack at any time, in reality. Let alone when it's come around the corner and suddenly find it on the grass, very narrow on the left. But more to the point was, and I think we've got rain.
We have.
I think we have.
That was to be my next point, actually. And I think, this area where Dumbrek has had his moments is heavily affected by wet weather. It's also at the Grand Prix track as well, so if you think about the Nordschleife on a kind of regular clock, we're talking Adenauer Forst at 9-10 o'clock, and the Grand Prix circuit being closer to 6 or 7 o'clock. So there is a significant chunk of the clock face of the circuit affected by rainfall now, and I would doubt if all areas of the Nordschleife are currently wet, but certainly the first, what would you say, first 10 kilometres or so could be very, very greasy indeed.
Yeah, just had a tweet that's confirmed it has started raining, certainly in the pit and paddock area of the Nürburgring, and we don't know much further out on the north side, but obviously some of it, it's it's down to 9 degrees at the moment, and it is just starting to rain, which is just going to throw in yet another bit of fun into the mix of it.
Thanks to a number of listeners on Twitter addressing their tweet to @RSL_studio, updating us about the band of poor weather which is moving in, and confirming that it is the 44 car in the barrier. Now, thankfully, as Marcus Winkelhawk headed past the scene, he had already been slowed to 60 kilometres per hour, but I wouldn't fancy encountering that car facing the wrong way and the headlight glare when you are still at speed and the yellows are only just coming out. Also, being reminded that the Glickenhaus is in 28th position and with the best time of 8:40.5, so just a bit behind the SP7 leader, showing in the pits having completed 7 laps. Yeah, and the rain really starting to hammer down on the Grand Prix circuit. Well, we had evidence of that a moment or two ago, and as I said, it's either creeping up to Adenauer, or it's come from that direction from Exmüller and is now starting to envelop the more familiar twists and turns of the technical Grand Prix circuit. But this is tricky now, because if you are out in the car as it starts to rain, it's kind of your job to report back to the team, and then when you get out of the car, you've got to tell your drivers, it's raining here, go easy. By the time they get in the car, it could all completely change. The bit that was wet is now dry.
Become a racing driver. It's glamorous, they said. Yes. Oh, no, it is. There's an awful lot to deal with, and you're processing and stuff at the time. But you say, just to throw in a bit of mix, we're not happy with a 24-hour race to come in, okay, 48 hours time, not quite, but a night. And now let's have a bit of rain in there as well. So if we get it much later in the year, we've got a bit of snow as well, just for the fun of it. Slow zones, code 60s, 100 cars, 23 classes. You getting the picture?
I am. I had a rough idea of the picture before we arrived today.
I know,
as well. But
it's not a 10-lap sprint, is it?
No, far from it. And the darkness and the rain just amplifies that. My thanks to Oliver Travavas. I probably completely mispronounced your surname there, Travavas, or Travavas. Telling me more about twin scroll turbos. He's addressed this tweet to @Paul Trustwell as well.
Oh, he's put sort of my glory. I was going to do that bit. Go on.
Right, a twin scroll allows 2 schools of thought in one turbo: response and high rotational speed for top-end power. It's funny, I was reading some stuff last night that actually helped with the bottom-end power. The 2 chambers in the same turbo unit and the same turbo housing offer the benefits partially to give a better all-round unit. So rather than like the Ferraris these days, the 488s have a twin turbo in the hot V, it's just a single turbo with 2 ways for the air to travel and 2 separate turbines, effectively.
Well, a twin turbo is naturally on a V engine. It's actually still a single turbo because it's a V. It's a turbo for each bank. So twin turbo on a V engine is a bit of a misleading name or title, because it has to be, because it's one for each bank. But a twin scroll is normally a turbocharger gathers all the exhaust gases into one chamber and does what it needed to do. A twin scroll allows it to gather exhaust gases from different and separate pairs of cylinders.
Yes,
to put it in one chamber, so that makes it more efficient.
Yes,
that's the point.
And I think it's how they exit as well.
Correct.
To create the order of the pistons, 1, 3, 2, 4,
sort of
or
about
whatever.
Swirl patterns and things like Adrian Newey understand while they're having breakfast.
Yes.
To go and design.
But I was just interested to read, because I thought, oh right, we've got this new Toyota Gazoo Racing Super GT4. What engine's in that then? And it turns out it's exactly the same BMW engine you find in the M4 GT4. So that should actually provide us a good competition, because it's all about how the car goes through the air, how slippery it is compared to the BMW. So thank you, Oliver, for your input. We'd welcome more on that theme or others at RSL_studio for the 50th anniversary race of the 24 Hours of the Nürburgring, 48th edition. All live here on RS1, part of the Radio Show Limited network of channels, and we've another hour and 6 minutes of night practice to enjoy. I think that really has put the kibosh, though, on times improving because of now pretty serious wet weather. So much so that an Audi has had to pull off at the start of the lap, and that is the number 53, yes. So that's the car on the GT tyres, and in the SP10 category. SP8, so it's not a fully legal GT4 car, although it's labelled as an Audi R8 LMS GT4. And the driver lineup there: Kari-Pekka Laaksonen, somebody that fans of the Corentic series and the TCR division will know all about the Finnish driver. Christian Jepsen in that driving lineup, along with Jan Sorensen and Roland Vashkow. So they are with GT Tyre Motorsport with WS Racing.
But where it's pulled off is just at the beginning of the circuit, so it's got
Awkward, isn't it?
Exactly, it's the most awkward place to basically be. That car's going to basically have to be parked where it is now and retrieved at the end of this session. So
Yeah.
it's not taking. It's parked out of the way quite safely, but it's something where he was still able to drive it and steer it off of the way quite safely. So it hasn't lost power or drive completely, but it's certainly not going to go any further in this session with just over an hour to go, Johnny.
Laura Kryhammer deep in conversation with one of her teammates, it appears. Laura is, let me just make sure I'm identifying the right car. Yes, in the GT tyre garage with an SP3T Volkswagen Golf, a Mark 7 GTI, in fact, that Laura will share with Celia Martin and Carrie Schreiner.
So they're running all-female lineup, isn't it? With,
it is.
All the crew are ladies as well.
Yes, that's a good point. And yeah, Laura, vastly experienced.
Sorry, as in engineers, mechanics. Sorry, Johnny.
No, not at all. Laura Kryhammer, the sister of Dominic Kryhammer, and she is very, very quick in not only a Golf, but also has done an awful lot of testing when it comes to the KTM Crossbow. And the effectively the works team that have developed that car. We've got 2 Teichmann Racing KTMs in the entry this year, but a different machine for her to get her head around. And as you say, yes, an all-female mechanical crew as well for the GT Tyre Golf. Paul?
Difficult situation at the moment, because you say just over an hour to go. Rain is falling. It's pitch black. How much are you going to learn? Well, the answer is possibly quite a lot, because I had a quick sneaky look at what the weather forecast was for the rest of the weekend, and it's very mixed. Some high winds, no storms as such, but certainly the chance of the winds blowing in some inclement weather, and rain is certainly a strong possibility over the course of the 24-hour for the race. So actually it's probably not a bad idea to get out and get some laps in and work out where the grip is. John Hindhoff and I have commented on many occasions about this event, and you as well, Johnny. The nature of the Nürburgring Nordschleife itself is that a lap out there is never wasted. You'll always learn something. You'll come across a car somewhere where you've not come across one before. You'll have to take a bit of evasive action that you didn't have to take before. And there's always a possibility that you will learn something by going out. What you don't want to do is to take an unnecessary risk and end up franging the car and bringing home either an expensive or a time-consuming repair that the team then have to work on to get the car fit again, or if it's not, if it is repairable, that is, of course. So I would say it's worth going out, but responsibility very much on the team managers to make sure that the drivers do take care, and it's the ones who need the practice and need the experience that you put in the car at the moment and send them out. And whether the choice for tyres is a full wet or an intermediate, well, they just have to suck their teeth and decide. Because whatever you put on, as you've said, Johnny, there's some point on the circuit where it won't be right because the conditions will be wrong for it.
Absolutely, I think it's spot on there, Paul, and I would naturally say that any lap in a racing car is never wasted. That's good. There's one thing, but the point that you're actually making, the value of what you're saying is there, Paul. That says there's so much intel to be gathered, and this is what we're talking about. These drivers, that rather than just journeymen driving around, it's all that information. It's different conditions, even if they don't have it again in this race. Those conditions, a driver will tell you, say what the car's doing, they'll be able to come back and report, and they'll log it. It's there in the memory bank for. It might happen in the next race. It might be worse. It might be better. You know, it's all that information, and that's how these teams. And as you were saying, Paul, that the strategy at this event is so much more critical than some of the other events because your laps are so long. You've got that information. They've got to draw on. They've got a knowledge bank, a knowledge base. They can go back to and say, well, hang on, when X did this in these conditions, bum, 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 is it any different? No, okay, fine. We know what happened. And it's that information that can lead to good decisions and strategy.
Yeah. And in the heat of the moment as well,
Absolutely.
because if you have to make a split-second decision, your car's heading through Tiergarten, do we pit, do we not? To draw on the experience you've had for the 2 previous days could send you down the right way to win the race.
But that's why we need people like Paul that does exactly this and understands the strategy, but remains completely calm. And I mean that as an absolute compliment to you there, Paul. And I know you've done a little bit of this kind of work with other stuff on sort of VW Fun Cup and that kind of thing for different teams. It's because you understand it, but remain almost emotionally separated from it. You're not concerned about, they haven't got that driving bit, you haven't got that element. You can just, you look at the facts and the figures that brings it in, and that's what somebody like that does, because it's the information you need. Then that feeds to somebody else and says, right, now you go and do this. And we said this earlier in the show, didn't we, Johnny, that a driver has to do as he's told. It's not just about, it's the driver's actually, they always say it's the most easily changed component in a racing car is the driver. Everything else they can work on and develop and engineer and process and upgrade, the driver they can change. Unplug one, put another one in, you'll get some different information. And that's what it's all about. And that information being fed through, teams get to make decisions and then say, right, we need you to do this now for so many laps or this pace or whatever, because they've got a strategy.
Yeah.
It's not about it's not about you, mate. It's about
the bigger picture, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, and trying to get the result for huge brands that are involved in this race year in, year out. Frank Stippler, a winner last year, now at the wheel of the number 1 car. His name is down for another one of the Audis as well. The question is, will he feature in both, or is that just a bit of an insurance policy from the squad? Because due to be joining Jules Gounon, Michele Beretta and Kim Louis Schramm in the number 5 car, along with his more regular mount elsewhere at Phoenix Racing, car number 1. And there are a number of drivers down for double duty, perhaps more so than on the original entry list at Porsche, because several drivers having been declared not fit, should we say, or more susceptible to COVID-19. An outbreak detected at the 24 Hours of Le Mans within Porsche, which eliminates 9 works drivers on the spot, and a significant amount of rejigging necessary since then. Through the faster version of the chicane towards the end of the Grand Prix lap goes Frank Stippler. Will he turn left or right? It is left. Out onto the Hansen back then, with the BMW M-Power branding to driver's right, but very much an Audi R8 LMS for the German, with a slower BMW out front, but there looks to be pretty much clear road if he can clear this car. But we're going to go, I thought we were going to go into a code 60 then, but that is later on in the lap, out of the Fuchsrohre and down the hill into Adenauer Forst. So up until that point, through Flugplatz and Schwedenkreuz, you can go as fast as you wish.
Yeah, he's got, according to my little tracker here, he's got about 5 cars up ahead of him. But after that, there is a lot more vacant track out there. As I say, a lot of people taking the chance to come into the pits whilst this shower of rain passes. Does mean, of course, there's a bit more space out on the track, and it's all a question of how Frank can deal with the traffic out there. If he's able to go quicker, well, that's probably unlikely. An 8:20 is the fastest for that car in this session. His overall fastest from this morning as well, 8:18. So I don't think he'll be doing that. But again, he'll be pushing and learning just how much grip there is available as he turns out, goes around the first part of the lap. And yes, there's so few more cars now venturing out, and it's still long enough to get your team out there. In terms of qualifying the drivers, there's no restrictional condition in the regulation that says you have to do laps at night. The clerk of the course can enforce a night driving ban on certain drivers if he feels that they're not qualified or not able to drive at night, and then it's up to the team, of course, to show that the opposite is true and that driver is capable of driving at night. And the only time to do that, of course, is by going out during night practice. So it's a good idea to get all the drivers out at night. There's nothing in the regulations that says you have to do night laps. The only restriction is that sometime over the course of the 3 qualifying sessions, you have to do 2 laps. Each driver has to do 2 laps. So a relatively easy qualification minimum, and as I say, importantly, no requirement necessarily to do any night laps.
That's very interesting intel, Paul. I didn't know that. I thought there would be a requirement for you to have to do some of the night session. And just as a matter of interest, Paul, I'm not trying to catch at it, just genuinely a matter of interest. Do we know what the criteria is that the clerk of the course can exclude a driver? On what basis? Do we know that?
It's up to Walter Bornham, he's clerk of the course. It would be something like poor driving, an illustration that, I mean, bear in mind that in order to get your ring license, you have to jump through an awful lot of hoops already. And one of the requirements is to do simulator laps at night. So, you know, I think it's trying to take away one particular bit of pressure. But as I say, he will merely restrain one driver from a team of 4 from doing any night laps. So, as I say, and that will be on safety grounds only.
Yeah, interesting, because I say, as you just quite rightly pointed out there, that there's an awful lot to get through to get yourself to this point. So it's a fascinating bit of intel. I don't know whether we've got anybody in that situation for this. Just seeing one of the cars leaving the pit lane there. We commented earlier on the quality of the modern LED lighting systems on cars, and as Porsche went down the pit lane there, was a fantastic overhead bit of shot for a minute where, as it left the pit lane, on what we'd call almost kind of like running lights, and all of a sudden as it went over the line, it just popped the lights on, and it was like a daylight switch.
Yeah, totally.
I've never had the luxury of driving behind lights like that. It's quite incredible. It's just, these boys have got it easy, I tell you. I said very tongue-in-cheek.
No, well,
no disrespect at all.
Visibility is key, particularly when you're darting through traffic, and yeah, it's technology that's been honed through the years at places like the 24 Hours of Le Mans. You know, Audi turning out with the LED technology that they had on the front of the R13s, quite possibly, onto the 15s and the 18s, and you know, they were key to the development of this technology.
Are they not running R8s anymore?
In this race, yes. It's been a little while since we've had them in LMP1.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, you knew exactly what I meant. Yeah,
completely.
I can just visualise Paul shaking his head now, like, what is he on about?
It got very tight indeed for a KCMG Porsche, again coming out of the Yokohama S, when the Garage 59 Aston Martin AMR GT4, which is Alexander West, who had a big, nasty-looking crash at Le Mans last weekend in the Ferrari at Porsche Curves, joined by Chris Goodwin, Darren Turner and Johnny Adam. And again, a little bit of confusion as to which side of that SP8T car the KCMG should go. Decided on the right, just as the Aston Martin was easing its way out towards that part of the circuit. And if the KCMG hadn't got out of the throttle, it would have been on the grass, which is very greasy now with the rain, and quite possibly into the barrier. So KCMG had to check up and then follow the Aston Martin nose to tail.
And again, Johnny, a very sort of mediocre average.
Innocuous sort of,
driver lineup in that car. Johnny Adam, Darren Turner, Chris Goodwin, who was the other?
Alexander West.
Alexander West.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, just the journeyman drivers having a bit
pretty
of fun,
much.
Yeah. Not.
Darren and Johnny straight out of the factory. Chris Goodwin is a factory development driver, of course, at Aston Martin now. Alexander West is the bronze, and I'm not sure whether you necessarily have to have one in an SP8T entry. Maybe you have to have an equivalent of a bronze or a silver in your combination. But Garage 59 certainly going to start the race as one of the strong favourites in SP8T. That is the class that Alex Brundle was victorious in last year with Jamie Chadwick and everybody else. I'm sure this weekend will provide us here at Radio Show Limited the opportunity to interrogate Alex Brundle about that victory over 12 months ago now, but one that he thoroughly enjoyed, I know.
Of course, sorry, Paul.
SP8T class does feature an Aston Martin this year. Probably the main, not the only Aston Martin in the race, but the main attention of the Aston Martin racing team. Car number 59, that's the Garage 59 car that you were just talking about, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
But of course, Johnny Adam, fresh out of the GTM car, winning at Le Mans last weekend with TF Sport. Tom Ferrier, team principal that, and no mean peddler in his day as well. And I'm allowed to say that because I know, because I was his teammate, so I know how good he was.
Right. Yeah. No, I remember him in his touring car days, certainly.
Yes.
Early 2000s. Is that what you mean, or later than that?
It was slightly later. It was 2007 FIA GT3 European.
Okay.
With Tech 9 from run by Phil Hindley, another successful driver turned team owner in the day. Phil Hindley, TVR Tuscan champion, 1997, I think, off the top of my head, thereabouts. I'm sure that Bobby Verdon Rowe and Ian Flux and that will be messaging me straight away saying, no, he wasn't, he was this year, and so, and Fluxy won't be that polite, of course we know, but he still won the TVR Tuscan Championship, and went on to be a very successful team owner. And Tom was and he's done exactly the same. And TF Sport again, British GT last weekend in GT3 and GT4 categories, winning that. Le Mans, and again, just one of those teams that just seems to be. They're always out. You almost don't know how they have the manpower and the logistics. And you mentioned this about Porsche earlier, having so many drivers dropped from last weekend after tests at Le Mans, COVID-19 positive tests. And what do? We mentioned this earlier, didn't we, about the motorsport industry. One of the absolute stellar things we can do in this industry is adapt. We can do it, we can change. We don't take it on. It is evolution. It's always doing that. And they turned it round. And again, these cars out all over the place, everywhere. You've got TF Sport, we've got people at Le Mans. I mean, the logistics of running a team for a 24-hour race is incredible.
Yes. Doing
it 2 weekends in a row. The British Touring Car boys are saying they've got back-to-back weekends and it's so busy, it's hectic. They've been at Thruxton one weekend, then they're going to Silverstone. Le Mans 24-hour, tell you what, don't have a break, go to Germany. It's only 60k away. While we're in their area, let's do the Nürburgring 24-hour. That's proper stuff. That
full-on commitment.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing about Tom Ferrier and his team is that it's just been incremental steps. He didn't dive in, headlong straight away. Dabbled with the ACO Championship with the Michelin Le Mans Cup, managed to win that at GT3 level. That gave him an auto invitation into Le Mans the following year. I think just to be on the grid that year, he was most grateful for. Now I think we're 3 years on from that, and he wins the race with Charlie Eastwood, Sally Yolich, and Johnny Adams, as you mentioned. So it's properly on track there for TF Sport and Tom Ferrier's outfit. I remember the days when he used to race Apple 156s with Gary Piper at Gary Ailes.
I
can probably tell me some stories.
I can tell you stories there regarding Mr. Ailes and Mr. Piper, yes.
In the National Saloon Car Championship, early 2000s, yes. They weren't necessarily some happy occasions. I remember an Alpha Hatch driving in pit lane on just 3 wheels. Anyway, it was Piper. The orange and black number 4 car heading into the pit lane. They're going to do a drive that shows there at HRT. So 4 did have in it Maro Engel, and I was trying to work out from the gate of the new driver. That might well have been Adam Christodoulou. Oh, it's not Lucas Stoltz.
It almost certainly will be Johnny. Manuel Metzger did the opening stint of 3 laps in the car. Then he was replaced by Lucas Stoltz. Maro has then been out for a 3-lap stint. So it will be Adam getting into the number 4 Mercedes next.
Okay, so that's correct on the rotation.
They all 4 drove it in the earlier session this morning as well, the 90-minute session. So they can get through 4 drivers in a 4-hour race. They can get through 4 drivers in a 90-minute practice session, and they'll get through 4 drivers in a 3-hour practice session as we got now. The team being run by Renaud Dufour, a French engineer, of whom I hold in very high regard, except for the one small fact that he started life, would you believe it, Johnny, in radio-controlled racing.
No.
He did.
Well, there's somebody else we could talk to about that this weekend, a certain Nick David.
My list for this weekend to talk to him about.
Yes. So, presumably fierce rivalry between HRT and Black Falcon, because I am used to that driver lineup and the number 4 being assigned to a Black Falcon Mercedes. But Black Falcon notably absent, it would seem, in Mercedes as far as GT3 is concerned. I know they appear elsewhere in the entry.
Exactly. It was a decision taken by Black Falcon that they would step away from the GT3 team. Hubert Haupt became team, I'll say principal, but it might be owner, and put his name on the door, in effect. Nearly everybody else just changed their overalls and carried on. So the team that you see as HRT is really Black Falcon staff with a different owner.
It is. You're absolutely right. It is owner Port, and my understanding is that Black Falcon will reappear next year in the top SB9 category in the NLS.
Okay. It was also interesting to see at least one Black Falcon car on the grid for the Porsche Carrera Cup Le Mans, which I think is the first time they have appeared at Le Mans as Black Falcon. So I wonder whether that is maybe with an eye to the future, to perhaps getting involved with GTE racing, but they would need a Mercedes in order to do that, because they're not going to change marque easily, although they are well known for racing Porsches as, elsewhere in the entry, and indeed for that Saturday morning support race. So that was an interesting addition to a, what was it, 52 cars on that Porsche Carrera Cup Le Mans grid, and provided a really interesting race. John Hindhaugh and I were kept on our toes throughout the 45 minutes. Brilliant Saturday morning entertainment ahead of the 24 hours of Le Mans. Speaking of 45 minutes, just ticked by that time remaining on the clock of a 3-hour session in complete darkness at the Nürburgring Nordschleife. And if the rain passes, we may get a few more takers to the session, I think, once risk levels have lessened. Because a thought for Falcon Motorsports, I'm not sure when they're going to get that 44 car back again. It's stranded out at Adenauer Forst. Could well be damaged on the nose and the rear, judging by the amount of dirt that had been brought out onto the racetrack. There was, I think, maybe a front splitter stranded on the grass on the left, and indicating that there had been more than one piece of contact, Peter, with the barrier.
Yeah, I mean, it's always dangerous to try and second guess what's happened from a couple of images and a little bit of, but just on what little bit of info we've seen of the side of the track there was an awful lot of gravel on the left-hand side, and it's almost as if he's just caught the curb, and maybe it's just started to rain. I am second guessing.
No,
I'm not suggesting
we haven't had a chance to witness the incident again. So
it's Peter Dumbrek again. You know, he's a B driver, isn't he? He's nobody, has no experience, no whatever. I jest, but it does almost look like it's clipped the left-hand side and it's just pulled it round. And I wonder if it's gone off on the outside, come back across and hit the inside, and that's why it ended up on the barriers facing the opposite way. Can't be that massive an impact at the front because its lights were still working.
They were.
So glaring the other driver, the Mercedes driver we saw on the way in. But an odd one there. It does look like a pretty fast shunt there, and it looks like he might well have collected both sides of the track.
Well, it's the long run down the hill into the foxhole, which is done at breakneck speed. Once you've gone through the 90-degree right at Arenberg, headed underneath the bridge there, you just have to rely on the memory banks as to where the track goes next. But there are one or two little kinks before then it's hard braking and the right of Adenauer Forst. But he'd already had his moment before you get to the curves at Adenauer Forst. And as I say, car is actually no longer on the track because the Code 60s have been withdrawn. But I fear for Falcon Motorsports, they may not get that car back for another best part of an hour, perhaps. And if the headlights are still working, that suggests there might be damage to the rear, which is exactly where the engine and gearbox are. So
yeah, don't want that.
I'm concerned for that Porsche.
And in one of the earlier NLS rounds, they had an engine fire in one of those cars, and they changed the engine overnight, and it came back out and actually beat the other car.
Okay, so that's a good way to come back out.
It is possible, yeah, it's a way to come back. That's a proper comeback, that's a bounce back, isn't it? But anyway, it's only Thursday, the race is not till Saturday.
I know, yeah.
Loads of time.
But you know, will they get the car fixed in time for qualifying, or will they have to start, well, where they have qualified to this point? Another huge incident, and this is a key Mercedes. I think that's the number 2 car, which is completely sideways. It is the number 2 car, damaged on front and rear, and this is a huge moment. We say it's only Thursday, but that's the Hubert Haupt, Jelmer Berman, Nico Bastian and Philip Ellis car, which has crashed where on the circuit? On the Nordschleife, and it's Schradenkreuz.
Schradenkreuz, yeah.
Which is a hugely fast part of the circuit.
That's a big shot. That car's 90 degrees across the track, right in the middle of the track, physically blocking it. That is a big shot. I can't see the front end. There's some serious impact on the back end of that car. The rear wing's on it, but that's because the rear wing's above the barrier height there, so it's hit the wall really hard. The wing's above it, and that's done it. Paul.
Yeah, that's Jelmer Berman on his outlap, as far as I can work out. Whether it's actually his outlap or whether he's done a couple of laps of the Grand Prix loop first of all to get his eye in, not sure. But he may well have just gone straight out onto the Nordschleife, bearing in mind there's less than 3/4 of an hour to go. But certainly Jelmer hadn't been in the car before,
right.
And he is now.
It's Martin Tomczak, one of the first on the scene in the 42 Schnitzer BMW M6 GT3. There is a bit of Mercedes back bumper to his left on the track, some more carbon fibre on the right, and an awful lot of, well, bits of grass that have been brought back onto the circuit, sitting right in the middle. Recovery vehicles have been there for some good time, but the rear right corner, although the wheel is still there, the whole of the bodywork completely stoved in.
That is a serious rear-end impact on that car, just because the wing's on it, it's deceiving. As I said, if you realise that the wing is now above the barrier height,
yes,
that's been completely unmarked. The mounts are there still, but the whole, that's a much shorter version of that car now.
Now, did Frank Stippler arrive at the scene earlier on? And this is the number 1 car, which may well have encountered this situation as slightly ahead of the Schnitzer BMW. Now, I think this is actually just going into it now, so he will obviously see the boards well before Schwedenkreuz, because Schwedenkreuz is pretty much a blind left-hander. You are approaching at an incredibly high speed in the GT3 cars, and this is where the marshals really are second to none in terms of the service they provide in order to slow the cars down. The 60 kph boards are stretched back over at least 2 marshal points. Mercedes already towed off from the middle of the track. This is so tricky now. If you are wanting to continue on the lap at speed, there's no telling what sort of shards, little bits of debris you might be picking up in your tyres.
Forget little bits of shards and bits. What, Johnny? There's absolutely, you're almost better off there taking to the grass
completely, yeah,
and just taking the grass, getting the pickup and dealing with that, because the amount of debris on the track, it's not just shards. There's big chunks of carbon and all sorts, and there's most of the rear end of that number 2 Mercedes is actually now off the car and on the track.
Yeah,
the car is off the track. It looks like it's gone in on the right-hand side.
I think
heavily.
It's damage to the nose as well, though.
Yeah,
so it's gone in at least twice.
He's lost it and hit it so hard on the back. It's just gone into Sweden. As you say, it's a fast brow, blind brow left-hander. It's almost as if it's just snapped, lost. I wonder if he's gone across, hit the back really hard, come round, tag the front, but most of that debris is gone. Yeah. I'm guessing, what, 50 metres down the track by the look of it? It's a heck of a... It's a plane crash length of debris.
And it's left the debris to prove that. And now, in fact, the affected area of slow zone, effectively, code 60, stretches back. Not quite to Flugplatz. We've got a code 120 in place on the exit of Flugplatz, and that's where the initial single-waved yellow will be being seen by Christian Engelhardt, who will be the next to arrive there. Paul, this is not part of the plan for HRT.
No, indeed. A lot of work have to be done to that. And from what you've been describing, and again, pictures that I've been picking up here, you don't know whether that one's going to be repairable or not. I mean, was it probably 3-4 years ago that you and I went down to that area with Schwedenkreuz. I had other duties, and we kind of separated there. You went off up further into the forest, I went back.
Yeah.
But there was a minor incident in the race that we were watching. There was somebody having put some oil down. And the problem is that you're arriving there, you've just come, as you say, past Flugplatz, very, very fast indeed. I mean, it's flat out, top gear, and you can't really see where you're going. You've got some steering applied because you're going through those left-handers, and if you have something ahead of you that's not quite going as fast as you are, or just thinking you're on the Berman on a presumably new set of tyres and probably not quite fully warmed up set of tyres, will have possibly come across something ahead of him, and being right on the limit, you've got nowhere to go. And that looks to me like an accident where, you've come across an incident up ahead of you, and that even though the marshals are there with yellow flags, you can't always take avoiding action. But no, I fear for that, and wouldn't be surprised if they're going to have to get another AMG GT3 chassis from somewhere for HRT on that one, I think.
It wouldn't surprise me. Paul, we've just been treated a little bit of on board, which I want to just talk through for a minute and explain what we've just seen. The reason I'm going to explain it is it's number 33 Falcon Motorsports car driven by Christian Engelhardt just come through that scene, and yes, obviously naturally very slow while the debris there. When he's tried to get back up to any kind of speed, the car is twitching, and he's having to be so careful. You can hear the throttle inputs really gentle. I know it's a Porsche, but we may not see it now. It's not raining anymore, But I reckon at that point, that track is extremely greasy, the worst possible conditions, neither one than the other. And that may well have encountered for the number 2 Mercedes. It might be something as simple as that. Just caught him out.
Yep.
And that's what happens on the Nordschleife. It's around the corner. No fault of the driver. I don't know that it's happened, but it's good just watching Christian Engelhardt, who, again, is somebody of experience, for another 7, 8, 9 turns, corners after that. He couldn't get the power down. It was very careful on the throttle inputs. There was twitching on the wheel, and he was just really sort of trying to feel it back in again. By 10 corners later, it's back on the power and it's everything okay. So I reckon, as we said, you mentioned earlier about the rain coming in, and I think your point was, you're probably spot on, Johnny. I reckon it isn't from the Grand Prix circuit going out. I think it's come in from the Nordschleife across that bit and on that brow. It would create, no pun intended, the perfect storm. Of course, having explained all that so eloquently, it'll be nothing of the sort, and it'll be something like a tyre failure.
Well, yeah,
we don't know. But
and hopefully HRT, if it is that, will make that public knowledge. But you'll appreciate we're piecing it together from limited information right now. There's going to be a red flag now, because presumably that incident that maybe needs barrier repairs, considering how quickly Jelmer Berman may well have smashed into the Armco barrier at Schwedenkreuz. And the other thing is, we've had rainfall, the rain has stopped, but what gets rid of the rain? Well, that's cars circulating, of which we've not had a great deal because the bulk of the entry's been in the pit lane. The other thing that gets rid of the rain is the warmth of the day. And what is it, 8, 9 degrees with no sunlight, clearly, because it's now coming up for 11 o'clock at night. So, I mean, the dampness on that road surface is not going to disappear very quickly. You might get a bit of a racing line coming through, but all it will take is Berman, as Paul was saying, to come up against side-by-side slower traffic and think, I need to go around these guys, and he's just maybe caught a damp patch of track in the darkness. These are all speculative comments, and until HRT issue a press release, probably tomorrow, as to where their race goes next for 2020, we will be, again, no pun intended, somewhat in the dark regarding that incident. So, the Conrad Motorsport car remains fastest by 3.9 seconds. That was the case at the start of the session as well, with Kim Louis Schramm in the number 5 car, although Marpelli set the time in the Lamborghini, and Jules Gounon, from memory, the 25-year-old Frenchman, set the time for Phoenix Racing. So that was the 8:15.343. Good. So the brain's still just about ticking over. Third position for the number 4 car, and that's the car that is still as the designer intended at HRT. Adam Christodoulou, Mauro Engel, Lucas Stoltz and Manuel Metzger, with the number 18 car of teammate Bernhardt, along with Earl Bamber, Jörg Bergmeister and Dennis Olsen, 4th position. The best placed of the pre-qualified cars remains the number 1 Audi from Phoenix Racing. Their R8 LMS for Nico Muller, Dries Van Tor, Frederik Gravisch and Frank Stippler, setting a time earlier on in the day of a 8:18.554. Now, red flag out, session clock has disappeared from in front of my eyes. I don't know what that necessarily means.
I'm going to guess that it's this session may be ended now, done. I don't think we're going to get a restart. It's just my gut feeling. I've got no reason for my gut to say that, and that's all I think it is. I just think we'd be surprised if we have that to go. There was only 20 odd minutes of it to go anyway, 25 minutes.
Yeah,
I just think it might well see in the end of that. But obviously, I hope that Berman is okay. I've seen no reason not to be. It's just quite a heavy rear end impact on that number 2 Team HRT Mercedes. Yeah, it's there's a lot of work for mechanics to do on that car if that car is going to take part in the race on Saturday. And as Paul said, they might be needing a new AMG chassis from somewhere.
Well, they know the place to find that, certainly. John Hindhaugh making the point that there was an incident earlier on in the day for one of the TCR runners, and a big incident resulted down at Schwedenkreuz in that incident as well. There is almost a hidden bump on the approach as you set the car up for Schwedenkreuz, that very fast left-hander, and the bump can catch you out. But I would have said Jelmer Berman would be well knowledgeable of that little idiosyncrasy of the circuit, heading down towards Arenberg. I do think it's a combination of the wet weather, which, yes, had cleared, but the track was still damp or greasy. He may well have been offline negotiating slower cars, and it's resulted in a huge incident, a huge shunt for Jelmer Berman. We hope he's okay. The speed that they were recovering the car suggested to me that he was, because they wouldn't have been moving that car at quite the speed they were without a rescue unit on the scene.
Absolutely. And I think, as Paul said, I think it was his out lap, he thought, wasn't it?
Yes,
well,
or after maybe a few laps of the Grand Prix circuit,
exactly.
and then heading out into the country.
Again, it just adds weight to the possibility of the story, if you see what I mean. That it just been one of those things, just caught him out. But
it wouldn't have been a mistake. It would have been something on the circuit, a slower car, or two cars who were side by side up ahead of him, who moved in front of him. I can't believe that a driver of Jelmer's knowledge and experience would have been caught out in any sense. And so, very unfortunate that we now have the red flag. And as you say, whether we're going to restart, open to some conjecture. I've sent out some messages to try and find out what the answer to that might be. 33 minutes left on the clock when we had the red flag, but already now 10 o'clock here in the UK, 11 o'clock in France, in Germany. Where are we? Nürburgring.
That was last week.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to do too many things at once at that moment. Yes, there's not a lot to be gained now, I wouldn't have thought, but yes, we'll find out anyway. As I say, we have people who will tell us.
I think that's an excellent point you just made there, Paul, that it's not just a question of whether we actually run the clock again. What would be the point in going out, given the lap length here, getting out there, getting up to a speed? What are you going to do? What are we really going to achieve now? The conditions are no different than they were. It's who's going to, even if they did restart the clock with how many minutes to go, say 20, who's going to want to go and do it, really?
Well, there'll be some takers, but if it gets...
There are some people that just can't resist.
If it gets less than 20 minutes, it's really probably not worth it. No. And we were... Paul, do you know exactly the time when the red flag came out? I think it's about 40 minutes to go.
Yes, 33.
33, oh, even less than that, right, okay. Yeah, I think that probably is it then.
News from the Nürburgring, Jelmer is okay.
Good.
The car did its job and took the impact.
Great news, thank you, Paul.
And the safety cell on these GT3 cars just continues to get stronger and stronger, if that's possible. But they have crash tested these cars to such an extent that it's all about keeping the driver safe. And almost the more dramatic the crash looks, the more panels that are crumpled, the better the energy's been absorbed by the car.
Dissipating it,
and not by the driver.
I was almost going to say that you almost want to crash test them to destruction, but in actual fact you don't want to do that.
Yes.
The whole is the very thing you don't want to achieve. So as you say, lots of rigorous testing there, and the car doing its job, and Jelmer Berman absolutely fine and out of that car, although the car in a less sorry state, as some people would say, and decidedly second hand. I think Graham Hill had a phrase of that, just describing a Formula One car at one point, looking decidedly second hand, which I thought was a very gentleman way of describing something that's not got many wheels left. or less than the engineer intended, or when it left the pits, put it that way.
Master of the understatement.
Yes.
Indeed so. I'm being reminded, by the way, of just how chilly it is at the Nürburgring. Obviously, we're into properly autumn now, and any heat that the sun offered earlier on today has clearly left the road surface, and on probably close to brand new tyres, may have been scrubbing them in, but tyre temperature would not have had a chance to build up either. But I agree with Paul, it would have been an outside factor that it would have led to the difficulty for Jelmer Berman, because he's done so many laps around this place through the years and knows every single little bump and twist this place has to offer. So that brings to a close our coverage for this evening. Thank you for joining us here on RS1, part of the Radio Show Limited network of channels. Confirmation that the session will not restart. and we can therefore look forward to action tomorrow. Don't forget that if you're unfamiliar with the schedule that lies in front of us, just head to radiolemans.com and scroll to the bottom of that page, and all the details are there for the schedule. But we look ahead now, Peter Snowden, to qualifying 3, which is just an hour-long session. We've had 90 minutes, we've had 3 hours tonight. Hour-long feels quite short, particularly if you're in the position of Falcon Motorsport.
For the Nürburgring, it's virtually a shootout. An hour, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. But you've got Falcon down to 1 Porsche as we speak. I don't know how damaged that Peter Dunbrett car is, and arguably even worse now is
not as bad as the number 2 Mercedes. No. So
have they got the time to find alternative chassis? We'll try and answer some of those questions.
Well, let's face it, it's out in 12, 13 hours' time, isn't it?
Yes. Well, we are live back on RS1 at 1:20 Central European Summer Time. That's 12:20 in the UK, of course, for the build-up to that session, and we'll have all of qualifying 3 live. And then we look ahead to top qualifying, which was for all the SP9 cars, Pro-Am and Pro, and 2 separate sessions, bear in mind, to set the sharp end of the grid.
That's going to be mega. That's going to be a lot of fun watching that. I honestly, I think I'll be surprised if we see the number 2 car out in that session tomorrow. I really do.
Certainly, if it's that chassis, I think you're right. But if they can, if Paul says they can get another AMG from somewhere,
are we permitted to do that? Because it hasn't qualified for the race yet. So yes, we can.
I believe so.
Yeah. Paul is the guru that will know
maybe a different story between the end of qualifying and the start of the race.
Correct, but I think we're okay at this point. So yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe it'll be out in a different disguise. It won't be many of those body panels that are on the car that appears tomorrow. Put it that way.
No,
whatever may be underneath it, there isn't going to be a lot of what was left on the exterior. Put it that way.
Paul, thoughts about? We won't hear from Paul. In fact. I'm being told not to hand to Paul by our executive producer, so we will wind things up there, folks. Thank you to Paul for all your input. Great to hear your voice, and we'll have more of you, I believe, tomorrow. Peter Snowden, thank you for your
thank you, Johnny.
Valuable knowledge as well throughout the course of the day. And there'll be more from the 3 of us tomorrow with qualifying 3. Join us then on RS1. Bye for now.